Chapter 2172. The night passed by quickly. The next morning, at dawn, Wuxia City was bustling with noise and excitement. Countless martial artists emerged from all over Sky-Gazing City, rushing to the square in the middle of the city. Today was the day of the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. The location of the Sacred Assembly was the Heaven Viewing Platform in the square. According to past practice, today was the first day of the Sacred Assembly. The warriors participating in the Sacred Assembly would not fight. They would gather on the Heaven Viewing Platform to discuss the profound meaning and experience of the martial way. Other than the young martial sages, many older martial sages would also participate in the Sacred Assembly to discuss and communicate with the younger generation. Warriors from all over the world did not want to miss this opportunity. Everyone wanted to listen to the martial sages exchange their experiences, hoping to get some inspiration and advice. The square in the city was very wide, taking up an area of 10 miles. It could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. There were also pavilions and gardens built on the square. The environment was quite elegant. As early as a few days ago, this place had been cleaned up and decorated very grandly. Countless warriors rushed into the square like a tide, and took up positions close to the Heaven Viewing Platform. The closer they were to the Heaven Viewing Platform, the more chances they had to see the martial sages and listen to their discussions and exchanges. As for the warriors who came late, they could only stand further away from the Heaven Viewing Platform. After 2 hours, the sun had just risen to the sky and the square was already crowded with people. At least 300,000 warriors gathered in the square, discussing in groups of 3 to 5. Their faces were full of excitement and anticipation. In the center of the square, there was a white platform that was 100 feet high. This platform was made of supreme spiritual jade, mixed with more than 10 kinds of special stones. It was very tough and could store the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It could absorb the spiritual power of the warriors and change into various formations. The platform was wide, at least 1,000 feet high. There were rows of golden flags on the edge, embroidered with the patterns of the sun, moon, and stars. Over 100 elite guards stood around the high platform like stone statues. They were all wearing standard silver armor, holding halberds and wearing red tasseled helmets. They looked cold and indifferent, exuding a dignified and austere aura. At this moment, a noble and dazzling golden light flew out from the governor's mansion and went straight to the square in the city. The square, which was already bustling with noise, immediately burst into cheers. "Look everyone! His Highness the eldest divine child is here. It's the First Highness, the commander of the immortal army and the city lord. The grand divine son is here. The sacred assembly is about to begin." As the cheers spread, many cultivators stopped talking and looked up at the sky. Under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, the golden light flew over the square and landed on the Heaven Viewing Platform. Shwa. After the golden light dissipated, 3 figures appeared. The leader was the great divine son, Yuanzhen. Today he wore an exquisite and luxurious dark golden dragon robe, with the sun, moon, and stars embroidered on the collar and sleeves. He wore a double dragon nebula crown on his head, showing off his unparalleled nobility. The 2 men standing behind him were Qinzheng, the commander of the Immortal Guards, and the Lord of Sky City. The 2 of them stood there with a solemn expression. Their postures were respectful, as if they were followers and guards. In this way, Yuanzhen's status was even more noble, and he was in high spirits. He also became the center of attention, receiving the reverence and worship of hundreds of thousands of martial artists. When the cheers in the square died down, Yuanzhen waved his hand, indicating for the crowd to quiet down. With a smile on his face, he announced in a loud voice, "Fellow cultivators, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, which is held once every 50 years, will be held today. I, Yuanzhen, represent the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation to welcome everyone. In this year's Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, the number of young martial saints who are qualified to participate in the Sacred Assembly has reached 28. In addition, I have also invited 6 martial arts masters to come to this Sacred Assembly to discuss their martial arts experiences with everyone. Now let's welcome the 6 senior martial saints to the stage." Hearing Yuanzhen's words, the martial artists in the square all looked expectant. Among the crowd below the heaven viewing platform, a few rays of light immediately lit up and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the 6 rays of light landed on the heaven viewing platform. After the light faded, 6 figures with different appearances appeared. Among the 6 veteran martial saints, there were 5 men and 1 woman. Most of them were white-haired elders. The youngest among them had a head of white hair, and looked to be about 50 years old. The 6 experts stood in a row on the heaven viewing platform, and saluted Yuanzhen with their hands folded. "Greetings, Your Highness." Yuanzhen nodded with a smile and excused himself. Then he introduced the 6 veteran martial saints to the crowd. He pointed to the first martial saint on the left and introduced him in a loud voice. "This is the mountain exploration martial saint, a highly respected expert. He is the famous temple master of the heaven viewing temple. More than 1,000 years ago, not long after I was born, the mountain exploration martial saint was already a famous martial saint expert. 800 years ago, the mountain exploration martial saint went into seclusion in the mountains and no longer cared about the affairs of the mortal world. He focused on educating people. Now the beloved disciple of the mountain exploration martial saint, Lady Chaoying, has also become a martial saint expert. It can be said that there are 2 martial saints in one sect. Many of you have watched the sacred assembly several times, so you must be familiar with the mountain exploration martial saint." As his voice fell, the white-haired, gray-robed mountain exploration martial saint saluted the hundreds of thousands of martial artists below the platform with his hands folded. Immediately, the crowd burst into enthusiastic cheers. Many martial artists bowed to him in return. In the hearts of many martial artists, the identity, experience, and character of the exploration mountain martial saint was indeed worthy of being called a person of virtue and prestige. Then Yuanzhen walked to the second martial saint. This martial saint was a white-haired man. He wore a long sapphire blue robe and held a folding fan in his hand. A green wine gourd hung at his waist. He was tall and handsome, but his eyes were a little lonely. His whole body exuded an aura of vicissitudes and melancholy, which made him look quite mysterious. Yuanzhen introduced him to the crowd. "I think everyone is unfamiliar with this senior martial saint, because this is his first time participating in the sacred assembly. However, this senior's identity and strength are not weaker than any of the leading figures. He calls himself the Wine Sage. He has the bloodline of the Wenren clan, an ancient hidden sex aristocratic family. He is a saint with 10 natural meridians. For more than 1,000 years, Senior Wenren has roamed the 4 seas leisurely. He has seen the world's scenery and explored countless forbidden lands and historical remains. Senior Wenren's vast knowledge and experience has greatly impressed me. It has been an eye-opener. I also believe that Senior Wenren will definitely bring new insights and experience to everyone by participating in this sacred assembly." Originally, many martial artists in the square were puzzled by this handsome, melancholy, and mysterious senior. After listening to Yuanzhen's introduction, the crowd realized that this person was actually a descendant of an ancient aristocratic family. He had even traveled the world leisurely. The world was big and full of strange things. However, 99% of martial artists would never have the chance to travel the world in their lifetime. Chapter 2173. After introducing martial sage Xianshan and Wenren Jiusheng, Yuanzhen introduced the other 4 seniors. The 4 of them had participated in the sage meetings a few times and many martial artists recognized them. For example, Sea Lord Fu of the Thousand Whale Island in the South Sea, Granny Yulong of the Crouching Dragon Mountain in the West Blue, Palace Master Di Shunxiao of the Cloud Sky Palace. Among the 6 veteran martial saints, the Exploration Mountain Martial Saint was the most senior, had the most respected status, and was also the most respected. Wenren Jiusheng's background was the most mysterious and the most unfamiliar. The other senior martial sages were also powerful and had a close relationship with the Heaven End God Nation. After Yuanzhen introduced them, he announced loudly, "Next, let's welcome the 28 young martial sages to the platform." As his voice fell, figures flew out from the crowd and the pavilions around the square, and landed on the heaven-gazing platform one after another. These people were young martial sages from all over the continent, and their strengths were between the rank 1 to 6 martial sages. Regardless of whether they were men or women, Every one of them had a graceful bearing and extraordinary bearing. Every time a martial sage landed on the heaven viewing platform, Yuan Zhen would introduce them to the crowd. This is martial sage Qing Shan, the youngest sage emperor of the Heaven End God Nation. This is martial sage Chen Yu, the palace master of the Southern Ridge Chiyue Palace and a famous beauty. This is Lady Chaoying, the beloved disciple of martial sage Xian Shan, a rare martial arts talent. This red-haired, golden-eyed young martial sage is the king of the Yan tribe, martial sage Atal. As Yuan Zhen's voice rang out, the number of people on the heaven viewing platform increased rapidly. In just a few minutes, 24 martial sages had ascended the heaven viewing platform and stood around Yuan Zhen. Even Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu had ascended the heaven viewing platform. Only Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were left. They stood in the pavilion at the corner of the square and waited anxiously. What's going on? Why isn't young Master Ji Tianxing here yet? Lu Baishuang looked around and searched for Ji Tianxing. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also anxious and worried as they discussed. Could it be that young Master Ji is delayed by something? Could it be that he's cultivating in seclusion and forgot that the sacred assembly is starting today? Why don't we hurry over to the Eastern Arrival Inn and find him? As the two of them discussed, they turned to leave. Lu Baishuang frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly he thought of something and quickly said, "Don't go." Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian stopped and looked at her in confusion. What happened? If we don't look for him and he misses the time, wouldn't that be? Lu Baishuang shook his head and said calmly. Everyone knows that the Xinwu Sacred Assembly will be held for 3 days. On the first day, there will be no battles, only discussions. The so-called exchange of Dao might not be very beneficial to us. The main reason was to show his face in front of everyone and raise his reputation and prestige. According to my understanding of young Master Ji, he has always been indifferent to fame and fortune. He disdains to show off his prestige in front of others. Moreover, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly did not stipulate that young martial saints had to participate in the Dao discussion. I don't think young Master Ji will come today. He will only appear tomorrow when everyone enters the void platform to fight. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian looked at each other and fell silent. Both of them knew that Lu Baishuang and Ji Tianxing had an inexplicable relationship. Since Lu Baishuang was so sure, it was most likely true. The two of them fell silent for a moment and couldn't help but sigh. Since Holy Emperor Baishuang is so sure, it must be true. I didn't expect young Master Ji's character to be so noble. He is indeed different from ordinary people. Yes. So many young martial saints want to seize this opportunity to show off in front of everyone and raise their reputation. Only young Master Ji doesn't care about fame. In terms of state of mind and level, he is 10 times better than these martial saints. Zhuo Mingqi frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly he thought of something and couldn't help but ask. That's not right. If young Master Ji isn't here to raise his reputation, why is he here? Previously, when we advised him to leave, he said that he has a reason to stay. Mu Changtian also realized that something was wrong and looked at Lu Baishuang in confusion. Lu Baishuang frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, "If I'm not wrong, he must have come to participate in the sacred assembly for the competition on the void stage. Either he is here for the void stage, or he is here for the rewards of the sacred assembly." Rewards? Mu Changtian frowned again, still confused. It's just some cultivation resources and holy weapons. Young Master Ji shouldn't care about them, right? Lu Baishuang shook her head and explained. Those are just ordinary rewards. Of course he doesn't care about them. I heard that the reward for the first place of this sacred assembly is incomparably generous. It is said that other than the cultivation resources and holy weapons, there is also a mysterious pearl. That pearl seems to be something that martial god Tianju found by chance in the astral wind fire layer. When he was in the astral wind fire layer. Zhuo Mingqi suddenly understood and nodded. So that's it. The astral wind fire layer is extremely dangerous. Even if a martial saint enters it, his life will be in danger. That mysterious jewel must be a rare and precious treasure. Only a treasure of this level can tempt young Master Ji. Mu Changtian nodded slightly and said with a smile. According to the usual practice, Yuan Zhen will announce the rewards after the Dao discussion. We will know the result then. After the three of them finished their discussion, they stopped worrying about Ji Tianqing and flew up to the sky and landed on the heaven viewing platform. Yuan Zhen glanced at the three of them and introduced expressionlessly. These three young martial saints are Martial Emperor Bai Shuang, Martial Saint Ming Qi, and Martial Saint Chang Tian from the Luoshui Divine Country. When the three of them stood on the heaven viewing platform, he looked around and frowned. There are 28 participants in this sacred assembly. Why are there only 27 people here? Yuan Zhen asked subconsciously. His voice wasn't too loud. The martial artists in the square could not hear it clearly, but the martial saints on the heaven viewing platform heard it clearly. Everyone was shocked. They looked around and whispered to each other. No one dared to believe that someone had signed up but did not show up on the platform. Was this not to embarrass the first divine son? Who was this person? Did he not know the immensity of heaven and earth? A cold light flashed in Qin Zheng's eyes. He said in a deep voice, "First Highness, the 27 young martial saints are all here. Only Ji Tianqing is absent. This person has always been arrogant and domineering. Everyone knows that he does not put the martial artists in his eyes. He is not here today, because he disdains to be with the martial saints." Qin Zheng's voice was deep and powerful. It spread throughout the square, and was heard by the hundreds of thousands of martial artists. Chapter 2174. If Qin Zheng had not said that, the crowd would not have guessed who was absent from the sacred assembly. Even if they had guessed that Ji Tianqing was absent, they would have thought that he was trying to embarrass the Grand Divine Son. However, Qin Zheng's words made it seem as though Ji Tianqing was looking down on the martial sages on the stage, and did not want to show up. However, Ji Tianqing was arrogant and domineering. This was something that the entire mainland knew. No one could refute Qin Zheng's words. The expressions of the 30 martial sages turned unnatural as they felt awkward and indignant. The young martial sage Qing Shan muttered with a strange expression. Even if he is talented and powerful, he should not be so rude. This is the martial arts sacred assembly of the entire mainland. With so many martial sages and seniors present, how can he be so arrogant? Martial sage Chaoying, who was dressed in green and wore a Taoist crown, said with a complicated tone. After all, his identity is special. He is the reincarnation of the Grand Divine Son. It is reasonable for him to be arrogant. Another young man in a golden robe was martial god Tianju's fourth son, Yuan Chong. On the night of the battle between Ji Tianqing and Wu Duantian, he had been present and watched it. He was also hostile towards Ji Tianqing. He sneered and said in a mocking tone, "So what if he is the reincarnation of Kenshin? Does he really think that he is Kenshin? He had just broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago, and he was already so arrogant and condescending. When he reaches the half-step to divine realm, won't he bring chaos to the world and look down on the three great divine masters?" Not only were the young martial sages talking about it, but even a few of the older martial sages were unhappy. Island Master Fu, who was wearing a blue robe, stroked his white beard that was more than a foot long. He shook his head and said, "No matter how talented he is, he can't be so arrogant. It will affect his reputation and ruin his luck. Why doesn't he care about it?" Granny Yulong and Yunshao Palace Master also complained about it. They felt that Ji Tianqing was too arrogant, and it was not a good thing. Only Wenren Jiuxing was waving his folding fan lightly as if the matter had nothing to do with him, and he seemed to be lost in thought and didn't say anything. The white-haired martial saint Xianshan coughed softly and said in a deep voice, "Let's not discuss this anymore. I believe that he must have his reasons for not coming. After all, his identity was special. What happened the night before had already caused a huge commotion. Today, there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators present. It was reasonable that he didn't want to show his face in order to avoid causing more trouble. It's fine if he doesn't come. We don't have one or two more people, nor do we lack one or two people." After saying that, he cupped his hands towards Yuan Zhen and said, "Your Highness need not take this matter to heart. The sacred assembly can proceed as usual." Yuan Zhen nodded to show that he understood. As expected, he didn't mention it again. However, both his and Qin Zheng's eyes flashed with a sneer of success. And in the square below the heaven-gazing platform, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were discussing animatedly, erupting with sound waves like a mountain torrent. As expected, a martial saint is missing. I heard from Lord Qin that it's Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing? This name is so familiar. Isn't he the god of slaughter in white who led the Luoshui divine kingdom to defeat the demon army? It should be him. I heard that he personally killed 2 to 3 million demons on the battlefield. He deserves to be called the god of slaughter. Not only that, I also heard that he killed 2 demon saints and single-handedly slaughtered hundreds of thousands of demon army. Oh my god. How can there be such a brave and ferocious person in this world? Does he have 3 heads and 6 arms and a ferocious face? I heard that this person is the #1 god's disciple of the Luoshui divine kingdom, and is also known as the #1 genius of our race. I wonder if it's true or not. No one knows if he's the #1 genius or not. But one thing is for sure. He's definitely the most arrogant and domineering person. He's not afraid of anything. I heard that he had a conflict with the Grand Divine Prince the night before. I guess he deliberately didn't come today to embarrass the Grand Divine Prince? He even dares to offend the Grand Divine Prince? He's really arrogant. Similar discussions rang out among the crowd in the square. Almost 95% of the martial artists had heard of Ji Tianqing's legendary deeds. However, ordinary martial artists did not know Ji Tianqing, let alone understand him. They were influenced by Qin Zheng and could only hear rumors. Their impression of Ji Tianqing was very bad. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi Muchangtian Jiujiu, Tai Hao Yunqi and the rest could only look on. They were secretly angry, but could not do anything. After all, this was the sky-gazing city, the territory of the heaven and divine kingdom. Qin Zheng, Yuanzhen and the rest controlled their mouths. It was up to them to criticize whoever they wanted. Fortunately, Martial Saint Xianshan had said something fair, so Yuanzhen would not be too harsh. After waiting for the martial artists in the square to discuss for a while, Yuanzhen announced loudly, "Everyone, I now announce that this year's Divine Martial Sacred Assembly officially begins. Today is the first day of the Sacred Assembly. More than 30 martial saints have gathered on the sky-gazing platform, and will discuss Tao in public. Everyone can express their opinions. All the doubts and guesses about martial cultivation can be voiced out. Everyone can discuss and exchange ideas together. As for the martial artists in the square, it is best to keep quiet and not make a ruckus. If you can learn a move or half a move during the martial saints' discussion, or comprehend some true meaning, then it will be your fortune." As his voice fell, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square indeed shut their mouths. Everyone held their breaths and focused, looking up at the martial saints on the high platform, as if they were listening attentively. On the sky-gazing platform, more than 30 martial saints looked at each other, but remained silent. No one stood out to speak first. Yuanzhen had long been used to this kind of situation. He smiled and said, "Since all the martial saints are so humble, then I will throw a brick to attract jade. In the past few years, I have been studying an ancient book called the 5 Elements Strange Records. Even though this was just a book of unofficial history, it was still a book. The stories recorded in it are mostly some unorthodox and unimaginable strange things in the wild, as well as all kinds of anecdotes. However, I am very interested in one of the stories and have studied it for many years. It is said that in the ancient times, there was a youth from the Spirit Wolf clan who was born with unparalleled talent. In just over 20 years, he cultivated to the martial saint realm, and became the first demon in history. Not long after that person broke through to the martial saint realm, he killed the emperor of the Spirit Wolf clan, and became the emperor himself. Originally, he had been engrossed in cultivation, and was only in his 20s. However, he was very familiar with the history of the Spirit Wolf clan. He even knew many secrets that the older generation did not know. After many years, people found out that this person was the emperor of the Spirit Wolf clan from 800 years ago. He had cultivated to the god realm, but he had encountered a strong enemy in the void and died unexpectedly. However, for some unknown reason, after he had died 800 years ago, he had miraculously been reborn. Chapter 2175. In the beginning, when Yuanzhen was telling the story, Many people listened attentively. Not only the hundreds of thousands of warriors, but even the martial saints on the platform also felt that it was strange. But in the end, everyone understood. It turned out that Yuanzhen had brought up this topic to let everyone discuss the reincarnation and rebirth. Anyone with a bit of intelligence would immediately understand that there was an ulterior motive behind his words, and that he was referring to something else. Then, when they thought about the rebirth of Kenshin as Ji Tianqing a few days ago, many people's expressions became complicated. The hundreds of thousands of warriors on the square looked at each other and whispered to each other. Even if there were a few people who had not heard the news, they would know after hearing the others' discussion. In this way, the news of Kenshin's rebirth as Ji Tianqing spread again, and became something that everyone knew. On the heaven viewing platform, many martial saints frowned and pondered, thinking about how to answer. Tai Hao Yunqi, Jiu Jiu, Lu Baishuang and the others all frowned, their faces gloomy. Jiu Jiu stared coldly at Yuanzhen and secretly said to Tai Hao Yunqi through sound transmission, "Brother Yunqi, this Yuanzhen is too despicable. He is despicable and shameless to the extreme. As the son of the Divine Master, how can he be so despicable? I think he must have made up the story casually. He is insinuating and purposely spreading the news." Tai Hao Yunqi nodded slightly and said, "I already knew that Yuanzhen was a hypocrite, but I didn't expect him to be so despicable. He did this because he wanted the news to spread to the whole world and bring endless danger and trouble to Ji Tianqing." On the other side, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also indignantly discussing with each other through sound transmission. "Damn Yuanzhen, he is really shameless bastard." Lu Baishuang was so angry that he gritted his teeth, wishing he could cut Yuanzhen into pieces. Zhuo Mingqi nodded in agreement and said with a sigh, "The great divine son of the heaven and divine nation, the future divine master, is so despicable. It is really unexpected. I don't know how young Master Ji offended him to make him hate him so much that he would resort to such despicable means." Mu Changtian sighed helplessly. No wonder young Master Ji didn't show up today. It seems like he already knew that Yuanzhen would embarrass him. It's also good that young Master Ji isn't here. Otherwise, this matter will become even more difficult to resolve. At this moment, Marshal Saint Qingshan was the first to speak after pondering for a moment. "Eldest divine child, what you said about reincarnation only existed in myths and legends. It's not credible. As the ancient saying goes, death is like the extinguishing of a lamp. Everything comes to an end." However, some things have happened recently that have overturned the views of this emperor and countless people. Like countless others, this emperor's understanding has been refreshed, and I have no choice but to accept the seemingly absurd concept of reincarnation. Yuanzhen nodded with a smile and said, "That's right. Someone has already proven that reincarnation does exist. This is extremely attractive to experts like us. Think about it, if we die one day, but we can still be reincarnated. We can make up for our regrets and take revenge on our enemies. How exciting would that be?" Marshal Saint Qingshan, it seems like you have some opinions on this matter. Why don't you say it directly? With Yuanzhen's encouragement, Marshal Saint Qingshan no longer had any scruples. He said loudly, "This emperor thinks that only those who have reached the god realm can reincarnate. Martial saints like us, although we are already standing at the peak of the continent, we still haven't transcended the limits of mortals. Only those who have reached the god realm and grasped the power of heaven and earth can reincarnate." The covered island master shook his head and said in a serious tone, "In my opinion, even a martial god expert would not be able to reincarnate. After all, the dead can't be resurrected. Life and death are all reincarnated. This is the law of heaven. I think only by leaving this world and ascending to the more mysterious upper realm can one escape the cycle of life and death, and have the chance to be reborn." The covered island master's words caused many martial saints to nod in agreement. Everyone was filled with curiosity and anticipation towards the mysterious upper realm. No one knew what kind of world the legendary upper realm was. Was it really not under the control of heaven? Granny Yulong sighed with regret and said in a low voice, "Although the covered island master's words are very reasonable. Since ancient times, only Kenshin has successfully ascended and left this world. Even people as strong as the three divine masters were trapped in this world. So even if we have guessed the secret of reincarnation, it is useless. If we can't ascend to the upper realm, everything is nonsense. The cloudy sky palace master frowned and thought for a while. He said solemnly, "Since ancient times, Kenshin is the only one who has ascended. He is the only one who knows the secret of ascension. When Kenshin fell, the entire continent was shocked and mourned. Everyone thought that the path to ascension was cut off, and no one knew the secret of ascension. But with the blessing of heaven, that person came back. In the previous life, everyone missed the opportunity. In this life, there is a chance to make up for it. No matter what everyone thinks, this emperor doesn't want to miss it again." Hearing his words, the eyes of the martial saints present lit up, and a strange look flashed across their eyes. As long as one was not a fool, they would understand what he meant. Kenshin was too powerful then. Even though everyone knew that he knew the secret of ascension, no one dared to offend him. But now it was different. Kenshin was reborn as a human youth, and had just broken through to the martial saint realm. If they took action now, the martial saints would have a chance to successfully obtain the secret of ascension. Moreover, this matter should not be delayed. If they delayed for a few more years, with Kenshin's talent, he would be even more powerful. By then, the martial saints would not be able to do anything to him. Thinking of this, many martial saints secretly clenched their fists and made their own plans. Yuanjun saw everyone's reaction and could not help but reveal a satisfied smile. He looked at the cloudy sky palace master with admiration. Obviously, this was the result he wanted. Next, Martial Saint Xianshan took the initiative to speak and change the topic. Everyone stopped talking about reincarnation and ascension, and started to discuss the cultivation of a few cultivation techniques. The martial saints expressed their own opinions. Just like the previous sacred assemblies, they conversed peacefully and harmoniously. However, Taihao Yunqi, Jiujiu Lu Baishuang, and the others felt indignant. Everyone remained silent and had no interest in participating in the discussion. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. It was evening, and the sun was about to set. The afterglow of the setting sun shrouded the heaven viewing platform. The day of the martial saints' discussion was also coming to an end. Yuanjun opened his mouth and announced, "Everyone, this sacred assembly's discussion has come to an end. I believe that after the discussion and exchange, everyone will have gained a lot. Tomorrow morning, we'll gather here again, and we'll have a sparring match. However, according to the previous sacred assemblies, I will first announce the contents of the rewards for the top 5. The rewards for this sacred assembly are exceptionally generous. There is also a mysterious gift." Chapter 2176. When the martial sages were discussing, many of the martial sages on the stage were not interested. But the ordinary martial artists below the stage were listening with great interest and were very serious. Now that Yuanjun was going to announce the rewards for the top 5 in the sacred assembly, the situation was completely different. The ordinary martial artists were not interested. After all, it had nothing to do with them. However, the martial sages on the stage were immediately energized and looked at Yuanjun with shining eyes. Yuanjun looked around and said with a smile, "Tomorrow's Void Platform Martial Arts Symposium will be the same as before. The top 5 winners will receive generous rewards. The 5th place will receive a lower-grade sacred weapon and 100 million spiritual stones or cultivation resources of the same value. The 4th place will receive a lower-grade sacred weapon, 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources, and a lower-grade sacred secret skill. The 3rd place will receive a middle-grade sacred weapon and 200 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. The 2nd place will receive a middle-grade sacred weapon, 200 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources, and a middle-grade sacred secret skill. As for the 1st place, the reward will be 300 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources, and a mysterious gift." After hearing the contents of the rewards, the martial sages were surprised and started to discuss. Wow! The rewards of this sacred assembly are indeed more generous than those of the previous ones. The 5th place will receive a sacred weapon and 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. In the previous years, There were only 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. I guess that in the past few decades, the holy nation's weapon craftsmen have made a large number of new products. Only the holy nation, the strongest nation, has such strong financial resources to take out such a huge amount of cultivation resources and sacred weapons as the rewards of the sacred assembly. If you can enter the top 5, not only will you be honored and famous, but you will also receive such amazing rewards. It's too tempting. All the martial sages were looking forward to it. Marshal Saint Qingshan frowned and thought for a while. He looked at the eldest divine son with shining eyes and asked, "Eldest divine son, what is the mysterious gift for the first place?" Hearing his words, the young martial sages around him all smiled and started discussing. Marshal Saint Qingshan is already in the top 5. It seems that he is aiming for the first place this time. Yes, Marshal Saint Qingshan is so concerned about the mysterious gift. It seems that he is determined to get the first place. Although he's ambitious, it's really too difficult for him to get first place. The fourth divine son, Yuan Chong, has always been in first place for several consecutive sacred assemblies. The fourth divine prince, Yuan Chong, is only second to the eldest divine prince in terms of talent and strength. Marshal Saint Qingshan is still lacking compared to him. Since it's a mysterious gift, of course I can't say it out loud. Otherwise, how can it still be called a mysterious gift? Yuan Zhen raised his hand, indicating for everyone to quiet down. He looked at the martial saint of Green Mountain with a smile, and said calmly, "The martial arts competition will begin tomorrow, and that mysterious gift will be announced to the world." Since that was the case, there was no harm in saying it now. This seat will tell you the truth. That mysterious gift was a pearl that Father God accidentally obtained in the heavenly wind fire layer, when he was on a mental journey. That precious pearl seemed to be made by nature, as if it was a divine object nurtured in the layer of wind and fire, or a crystallization of the wind and fire, with infinite power. Father God was already an omnipotent divine being, so he didn't have much use for it, so he wanted to give it to this seat. But this seat felt ashamed to accept it, so I suggested to take it out as the prize of this sacred assembly. Only then would it be meaningful. After hearing Yuan Zhen's words, the martial saints showed respect in their eyes, and whispered to each other. "I see. The heavenly wind fire layer is the most dangerous, and only divine beings can travel in it. That precious pearl was born in the heavenly wind fire layer, so it must be a rare divine object. I wonder what kind of miraculous use that pearl has. No wonder it's called a mysterious gift." The eldest divine prince is really noble. The heavenly divine prince wants to give that precious pearl to him, but he took it out as the prize of the sacred assembly. The eldest divine prince's broad mind and magnanimity are really admirable. With the eldest divine prince's talent and demeanor, once he reaches the divine realm, he will definitely inherit the divine master's position. By then, the heavenly divine nation will be even more glorious. Marshal Saint Qingshan, Chowing, and the others praised the eldest divine prince. But Taihao Yunqi, Jiu Lu Baishuang, and the others were indifferent, and secretly curled their lips. Jiu showed a disdainful expression, and said to Taihao Yunqi, "This Yuan Zhen is really hypocritical to the extreme. It's disgusting." The fourth divine prince, Yuan Chong, has been in first place for many years. This is a well-known fact. Yuan Zhen took out the precious pearl as a prize, saying it's a prize for the sacred assembly, but it's actually a gift to Yuan Chong. "Yes, that's true." Taihao Yunqi nodded slightly and said expressionlessly, "This is killing two birds with one stone. He can gain a good reputation, and he won't really give the precious pearl away. However, I do hope that a miracle will happen in this sacred assembly, and destroy Yuan Zhen's plan." Jiu looked at him in confusion and asked, "Seventh brother, what miracle?" Taihao Yunqi looked in the direction of the east arrival in, and only showed a playful smile, but did not explain. Not long after, the sun set. Yuan Zhen left the Skyview platform with Qin Zheng and the Skyview City Master. More than 30 martial saints also left one after another. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square were still gathered together, discussing endlessly. Only a small number of people left, and most of them stayed in the square, waiting for tomorrow's martial arts contest. Under the night sky, the Skyview city was brightly lit. On the 5th floor of the East Arrival Inn, Ji Tianxing's room was pitch black. He was sitting cross-legged in the secret chamber, cultivating with his eyes closed, and his whole body was surrounded by a bright golden light. Just as Liu Baishuang had guessed, he had never thought of participating in the martial saint debate. It was because he disdained it, and also because he did not want to waste time and trouble himself. However, the most important thing was that he needed to cultivate a secret technique that was of utmost importance. For the whole day, he had been cultivating in the secret chamber, and did not leave even half a step. No matter what happened outside, or what happened on the Skyview platform, it had nothing to do with him. Soon the night passed. He did not stop cultivating until the sun rose the next day, and slowly stopped. The bright golden light around his body gradually retracted into his body. When he opened his eyes, a bright light flashed in his eyes, and his whole body emitted a sharp and terrifying aura. If one looked closely, they would discover that his body had undergone a subtle change. Every strand of hair, and every pore seemed to be shining with starlight. The voice of the burial of heaven sounded in his mind, and asked doubtfully, "The Divine Martial Sacred Assembly has already started. It's fine if you don't participate in the debate, but why are you in a hurry to cultivate the absolute saint sword body now?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Of course there is a corresponding reason. I must make sufficient preparations." Chapter 2177. You mean there will be danger in the void platform? Burial of Heaven immediately understood Ji Tianxing's meaning. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said calmly, "The void platform was set up by the Tianju divine nation. It seems to be a space opened up by martial god Tianju in the void. Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng's attitude towards me is obviously hostile and murderous. I have to be on guard against what they will do to the void platform. Even if they don't dare to kill me in front of everyone, it won't be a problem for them to make me wander in the void." Burial of Heaven said in a low voice, "Even martial saints can't stay in the void for too long. Once they encounter a void storm, tide or black hole, they will die without a doubt. Although you have cultivated the Armillary Heaven secret technique, and are invincible in the world, you can't use it in the void. Therefore, only by cultivating the Holy Sword body can you cross the void. Even if you encounter a void crack or a void storm, you will have a chance to escape." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "That's right. Only then can I be prepared. Although the Holy Sword body I cultivated in the past was powerful and domineering, it wasn't magical enough. This time I improved it and merged it with the astral body refinement art. I used the power of the stars to refine the Holy Sword body. Even if I wander in the void and can't return for hundreds of years, I can still absorb the power of the stars and my magic power will never dry up." Burial of Heaven was silent for a long time before he said with satisfaction, "Everyone knows that you are the reincarnation of Kenshin, but they don't know that you have already surpassed the Kenshin of the past. Now, after being reborn, you have completed an even more heaven-defying transformation." Ji Tianxing smiled and said with a complicated tone, "No matter who it is, if they have the chance to live again, they will live more brilliantly. All right, time is almost up. We have to go to the heaven viewing platform. I didn't show up yesterday. I don't know how that bastard Yuan Zhen will frame me." Burial of Heaven said in a playful tone, "The strong are not afraid of rumors. Why do you have to take it to heart? When you take the first place on the void platform and defeat all the martial saints, all the criticisms will fall apart." Ji Tianxing nodded and said no more. He got up and left the secret chamber. As the sun rose, hundreds of thousands of martial artists gathered in the city square. Most of them had been here since yesterday and had never left. Seeing the martial sages rushing to the square from all directions, the cultivators cheered excitedly and discussed loudly. Not long after, more than 30 martial sacred realm experts arrived at the heaven-gazing platform. Except for Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the Sky City Lord who were not present, the 27 young martial saints and the 6 martial arts masters were all present. Everyone stood on the heaven-gazing platform and had nothing to do, so someone took the initiative to start a conversation. The martial saint of Green Mountain looked around, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a mocking smile. It's strange. Why is it still the same as yesterday? Today was a sparring match. Why wasn't that guy here yet? Could it be that he won't show up again today? The fourth god's son, Yuan Chong, raised his eyebrows and said with a cold smile, "If that guy isn't here when the sparring match starts, it means that he has automatically forfeited." Humph. There are actually people who believe that he doesn't want to be with us. In my opinion, he is simply timid and doesn't dare to show up. The martial saint frowned and said in a deep voice, "In the past few days, his matter has become a hot topic in the city. Everyone knows about it. Even if he gives up on participating in the sparring match, it is a wise move to protect himself. It is understandable." The martial saint of Green Mountain said fair words without any malice. However, when the young martial saints heard it, they agreed that Ji Tianxing did not dare to show up. Chaoing, Chen Yu, and the young martial saints of the Heaven in Divine Nation all smiled and whispered to each other. Seeing that everyone was criticizing Ji Tianxing, Lu Baishuang frowned and said in a deep voice with a frosty face, "The sparring match hasn't started yet. There are still 45 minutes. Why are you all so anxious? I firmly believe that with young Master Ji's strength and temperament, he will definitely not give up." Her tone was resolute and decisive, and she said it with certainty. Many young martial sages stopped their discussion and looked at her strangely. The martial saint of Green Mountain smiled and asked in a playful tone, "May I ask this young lady, what is your relationship with young Master Ji? How can you be so sure?" Chaoing looked at Lu Baishuang and said in a strange tone, "Although this holy emperor Baishuang is from the Luoshui divine nation like Ji Tianxing, she is especially concerned about Ji Tianxing. That night, when Ji Tianxing and Union Master Wu were fighting, I saw some clues." The other martial saint, Chen Yu, was wearing a pink dress. She was dressed brightly and was especially enchanting. She looked at Lu Baishuang with a smile and said in a sweet voice, "As everyone knows, young Master Ji's origin is extraordinary. He is the reincarnation of a legendary figure. This holy emperor Baishuang has a unique insight and naturally recognizes young Master Ji. If she can become his partner, when young Master Ji returns to the peak in the future, Holy Emperor Baishuang will also be honored. With such thoughts and intentions, she will of course do her best to protect young Master Ji. I know this woman's thoughts the best." Although martial Saint Chen Yu's words were elegant, the meaning in her words was very contemptuous. She was clearly saying that Lu Baishuang knew that Ji Tianxing was the reincarnation of Kenshin, so she shamelessly stuck to him, hoping that she could follow him and achieve meteoric success in the future. When the young martial saints of various countries heard martial Saint Chen Yu's words, they all sneered and showed disdain. Lu Baishuang was so angry that her face turned pale. Her body trembled, but she could not say a word. Seeing that she was angry, martial Saint Chen Yu covered her mouth and laughed. She said in a sweet voice, "Oh, I have said too much. I have exposed Holy Emperor Baishuang's thoughts in front of everyone. I am so sorry." This sentence was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire. Lu Baishuang was unable to restrain her anger. She pointed at martial Saint Chen Yu and scolded, "You vixen, do you think all women in the world are as shameless as you?" Martial Saint Chen Yu's face suddenly turned cold. Her voice became cold and sharp as she shouted, "Lu Baishuang, who do you think you are? How dare you insult me in front of everyone?" Martial Saint Qingshan, Chaoing, and a few other young martial saints all glared at Lu Baishuang and scolded her. "Holy Emperor Baishuang, you insulted martial Saint Chen Yu in public. This is not what a holy emperor should do. You insulted martial Saint Chen Yu in front of the martial saints of various countries and martial artists. This is unforgivable. You must apologize to martial Saint Chen Yu. Otherwise, your reputation will be ruined after today." Even the fourth divine child, Yuan Chong, stood out and shouted coldly at Lu Baishuang, "Apologize to martial Saint Chen Yu immediately. Otherwise, we will jointly request that you be disqualified from participating in the sacred assembly." Chapter 2178. When Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian saw that Lu Baishuang was being ridiculed by the crowd, they stepped forward to help her. However, Yuan Chong and martial Saint Qingshan had the advantage in numbers. A total of 12 young martial saints scolded Lu Baishuang and asked her to apologize to Martial Saint Chenyu. Even Cloudy Sky Palace Master and Covered Island Master, the two martial arts masters, also put on the posture of martial arts seniors and lectured Lu Baishuang in a serious tone. After all, these martial saints were from the Heaven-End Holy Nation, or their vassal forces. The atmosphere on the stage became tense. Countless martial artists below the stage realized that something was wrong and started to discuss. Lu Baishuang was furious, but she was pressured by the crowd and could do nothing. However, to ask her to apologize to Martial Saint Chenyu? That was absolutely impossible. She would rather give up on the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly than bow down to Martial Saint Chenyu. However, once she gave up on the Sacred Assembly, it would be Martial Saint Chenyu's victory. At that time, she did not know how the crowd would frame her and her reputation would be tarnished. When she thought of this, Lu Baishuang was furious and helpless. Her clear eyes were covered with a layer of mist. In the end, she gritted her teeth and made up her mind. She looked at Martial Saint Chenyu and said with determination, "It was Martial Saint Chenyu who slandered me first, and you want me to apologize to her? Don't even think about it. Even if I give up on this." However, just as she was about to say that she would give up on the sacred assembly, she was interrupted by a voice. "That's right. No matter how big the world is, it can't be bigger than reason. You did nothing wrong, so why should you apologize? What's more, the other party is a vile and disgusting lowly servant who harbors evil intentions." It was the voice of a young man. It was cold and majestic, arrogant and domineering. The sound waves spread throughout the entire plaza, allowing everyone in the plaza to hear it clearly. Instantly, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square were stunned and looked up at the sky. The 30 over martial saints on the heaven viewing platform were also shocked and turned to look at the sky. They saw a dazzling golden light flying over from not far away. In the blink of an eye, the golden light crossed a few dozen miles and landed on the heaven viewing platform. Shwa. After the golden light faded, a young man in a white robe appeared in front of everyone. He was handsome and valiant, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His entire body emitted a domineering aura that seemed like the might of the heavens, and his gaze was fierce like lightning, causing others to not dare look him in the eye. Lu Baishuang, who had been filled with grief and indignation, suddenly showed a look of relief when he saw Yang Kai appear, and the mist in his eyes quickly dissipated. As for Martial Saint Chenyue, Martial Saint Qingshan, and the others, their expressions were cold and unpleasant. Without a doubt, it was Ji Tianxing. Zhuomingqi and Mu Changtian smiled excitedly. They quickly cupped their hands and bowed to him. "Young Master Ji, you came at the right time." Martial Sacred Chenyue, Martial Sacred Qingshan, and the others purposely humiliated Sacred Emperor Baishuang. Before they could finish, Ji Tianxing raised his hand to stop them. "There's no need to say more. I already know what happened." Zhuomingqi and Mu Changtian immediately stopped talking. After exchanging glances, they quickly retreated to Lu Baishuang's side. Martial Sacred Chenyue was dumbfounded by Ji Tianxing's scolding. She only collected her thoughts at this moment. She was furious and humiliated to the extreme, and could not help but cry bitterly. "Ji Tianxing, you bastard, you've gone too far. How dare you insult me in front of everyone? How dare you say such filthy words?" Martial Sacred Chenyue was not the only one who was dumbfounded. The few 100,000 martial artists and the over 30 martial sages on the platform were also dumbfounded. No one had expected Ji Tianxing, who had not shown himself, to amaze the crowd with a single brilliant feat. What a disgusting, vile, evil bitch. Such words could be said to have trampled on Martial Sacred Chenyue's dignity, which was extremely humiliating. Ji Tianxing looked at Martial Sacred Chenyue expressionlessly and said in a cold tone, "So what if I insulted you? Those who insult others will be insulted by others. Holy Emperor Baishuang has no enmity with you, but you slandered her in front of everyone. Isn't this evil and despicable? You think that because you're pretty, you can please powerful men. You think that all women in the world are the same. You even said that you understand women the best. Ha! Aren't you disgusting? Which of the words that I scolded you with just now was wrong?" In just a few words, He had scolded martial sacred Chenyue so badly that she stood rooted to the ground with a dazed expression. She was so angry that her face was as white as paper, and her body was trembling like a sieve. She pointed at Ji Tianxing, but could not say a word. After taking a few deep breaths, she finally regained her strength. She stared at Ji Tianxing with a cold expression and shouted sternly, "Ji Tianxing, you insulted my reputation in front of everyone. I will never forgive you. This hatred and humiliation can only be appeased by killing you." Ji Tianxing looked at her indifferently and said in an indifferent tone, "You? Forget it, I don't want to kill women. Moreover, you're a brainless idiot." After saying that, he did not even bother to look at martial sacred Chenyue. His contempt was obvious. Puffed. Martial sacred Chenyue was so angry that she almost went crazy. She opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. The two martial sages beside her quickly supported her and circulated their energy to help her recuperate. Lu Baishuang was originally filled with grief and indignation. Now that she saw martial sacred Chenyue being humiliated to the extreme and being angered to the point of vomiting blood by Ji Tianxing, she felt that her anger had been vented, and the anger in her heart dissipated. She looked at Ji Tianxing with gratitude and muttered in her heart, "Despicable guy, your mouth is so poisonous. You can actually anger me to the point of vomiting blood with just your mouth. In the past, you always made me so angry that I lost my sense of propriety. Now it seems that you've already been merciful with your words." At this time, martial sacred Qingshan stepped forward and stared at Ji Tianxing with a sharp gaze. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianxing, you've gone too far. You're a martial sacred, the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui divine nation. How dare you humiliate a weak woman like this? You've lost all your face." Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said with a faint smile, "Hee. I humiliated martial sacred Chenyue, and I've lost all my face? Then what about the dozen of you martial sages, men and women, old and young, teaming up to humiliate Holy Emperor Baishuang? Isn't she a weak woman? Yet you want to force her to apologize in public and disqualify her from participating in the sacred assembly? Then what are you doing? Extremely shameless. So despicable that it makes people's hair stand on end. You shameless martial sages from the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation are really eye-opening. I'm really glad that I didn't come yesterday. Being on the same stage as you is simply a great pain." Ji Tianxing not only scolded martial sacred Qingshan, but he also pointed at Yuan Chong, Chaoing and the 10 young martial sages. Even Island Master Fu and the Cloudy Sky Palace Master could not escape his insults. For a moment, the young martial sages' faces were ashen, and their eyes were burning with anger. Chapter 2179. Ji Tianxing. You are simply lawless. Young man, this is the Heaven's End divine nation. You are not allowed to be impudent. You are too arrogant. The Covered Island Lord and the Cloud Firmament Palace Lord rebuked Ji Tianxing at the same time. Ji Tianxing was fearless as he looked at them sharply. His lips curled up in a cold smile. You know that you are in the wrong and cannot defend yourself. You only know how to slander others? What I said is true. How am I arrogant? How am I lawless? Also, don't put on the airs of a senior before me. You are not worthy. The Covered Island Lord and the Cloud Firmament Palace Lord trembled in anger. Their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. The two of them were famous martial Dao masters. They had always been respected by others. Wherever they went, they would be praised by countless people. Naturally, the two of them were pampered and looked down on others. However, they did not expect Ji Tianxing to not have any scruples at all. He did not give them any face at all. He rebuked the two of them in front of everyone. It was so embarrassing that they wanted to die. However, Ji Tianxing was right. He was Kenshin's reincarnation. With his identity and background, who dared to call him young? Who dared to put on the airs of a senior before him? The Cloud Firmament Palace Lord took a deep breath to suppress his anger. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he said in a sinister tone, Ji Tianxing, you are indeed even more arrogant than the rumors say. However, I am a magnanimous person, and will not lower myself to your level. Let's see how long you can be arrogant for. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, longer than your little life. You. The cloud firmament palace lord suppressed his anger with great difficulty. Now he was angered to the point of nearly exploding on the spot. The covered island lord quickly changed the topic. He said with a cold expression, Ji Tianxing, you are so protective of the Holy Emperor Bai Shuang. For her, you are willing to go against all the martial sages. You are really infatuated. It is Holy Emperor Bai Shuang's honor to be able to climb up a branch like you. Ji Tianxing frowned and looked at him coldly. He said in a deep voice, Holy Emperor Bai Shuang is my friend. When my friend is in trouble, I will do my best to help her. This is a basic principle. I will only explain this once. If anyone dares to spread rumors to slander and tarnish my reputation, I will invite him to hell to die. Covered Island Lord, you should be thankful that you are still alive. The low and cold voice spread throughout the entire square, allowing the hundreds of thousands of people to hear it clearly. There was a soul-suppressing soul power in his voice. The Covered Island Lord's voice. For a time, hundreds of thousands of cultivators held their breaths, their hearts filled with fear as they stood rooted to the ground, not daring to make the slightest noise. The more than 30 martial sages on the stage were also stunned by his aura. They were all stunned for a moment. When the many martial sages regained their senses, they felt deeply ashamed and angry. They thought to themselves, how could I be intimidated by him? Yuan Chong, who was wearing a golden robe, looked at Ji Tianxing with a cold smile. He clapped and said, Good, Ji Tianxing, you are so impressive. Yesterday, you disdained to show up. Today, you scolded all the martial saints. Ji Tianxing, your arrogance and overbearingness really make me gasp in amazement. As he spoke, Yuan Chong walked out of the crowd and stood in front of Ji Tianxing, confronting him. The martial saints of the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation suddenly had a backbone. They looked like they were watching a good show. Because Yuan Chong was powerful and had a noble status, he was not afraid of Ji Tianxing at all. But what everyone did not expect was that Ji Tianxing looked at Yuan Chong and asked with a frown, Who are you? He asked calmly and naturally. He did not mean to humiliate Yuan Chong. After all, he did not know Yuan Chong. But this sentence made the faces of many martial saints change. Yuan Chong was so angry that his face turned green. He laughed and said, Good, Ji Tianxing, you are very good. You even dare to humiliate me. It seems that you are determined to go against us. Ji Tianxing was even more confused. He asked in confusion, Is there something wrong with your brain? I don't know you. I just asked casually. How can you take it as a humiliation? Are you used to being humiliated by others? Or are you deliberately trying to provoke a dispute? Ji Tianxing's expression and tone were very natural. No one could tell that he was pretending. But the more he was like this, the more angry and humiliated Yuan Chong and the dozen young martial saints felt. Finally, Martial Saint Xingshan could not stand it anymore. He coughed and said, Ji Tianxing was not here yesterday. It is normal that he does not know the fourth prince. Ji Tianxing, let me introduce you. This is the fourth prince, Yuan Chong. Martial Saint Xingshan wanted to smooth things over. Ji Tianxing naturally appreciated it. He nodded slightly and said, Martial Saint Xingshan is reasonable. Thank you for the introduction. When Yuan Chong heard this, he was so angry that his nose almost became crooked. He cursed in his heart, Damn bastard, he is definitely humiliating me. Similarly, no one introduced him. He knows Martial Saint Xingshan but does not know me? Is this possible? Anger surged in his chest. Yuan Chong pointed at Ji Tianxing and said proudly, Ji Tianxing, now that we are in public, you can show off however you want. Wait until we are on the void stage. I will let you know how powerful I am. Don't think that you are so great just because you took 3 moves from Wu Duantian. I can do the same, and far better than you. You should pray that you don't meet me on the void stage. Otherwise, he didn't say the rest of his words. He only snorted coldly and meaningfully. But everyone on the stage understood what he meant. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He said calmly, Although I don't know you, I have heard some news about you. I heard that you are Yuan Zhen's 4th brother. You have been number 1 in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly for a few years. Your talent and strength is second only to Yuan Zhen. You are known as Heaven and God Nation's number 2. Cough cough, number 2 genius. No one knew if it was a slip of the tongue, or if he said it wrong on purpose. Anyway, his serious expression did not look like he was talking nonsense. Yuan Chong was so angry that he gritted his teeth. But he could only endure it. He said coldly, "Since you know my strength, then you should know how stupid and laughable your previous words were." "No." Ji Tianqing shook his head lightly. He said calmly, "I want to tell you that from today onwards, you are no longer number 1. "What do you mean?" Yuan Chong frowned. He stared at him with a gloomy expression. Ji Tianqing said indifferently, "Because I am here." It was a simple sentence. There was no sense of exaggeration, but it was filled with absolute confidence and dominance. Yuan Chong's pupils constricted. He said coldly, "You are arrogant. But I will trample you under my feet." Ji Tianqing retracted his gaze. He could not be bothered with him anymore. He walked back to Lu Baishuang's side. He stood side by side with Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian. At the same time, he secretly transmitted his voice to Lu Baishuang. "When can you change your straightforward personality?" Chapter 2180. Lu Baishuang turned her head and glanced at Ji Tianqing. She wanted to explain, but when the words reached her mouth, she swallowed them back. She didn't know what to say. Should she tell Ji Tianqing that she didn't want to see others slander him? So she stood up for him? She just wanted to protect his reputation and innocence. She didn't consider her own situation at all. Even though she thought so, she didn't want to say it out loud. She didn't want Ji Tianqing to think that her care and protection was equal to the love between a man and a woman. She didn't want Ji Tianqing to think that she had ulterior motives and was deliberately trying to get close to him. Even though she had some inexplicable feelings in her heart, she also had her own dignity and principles. She didn't want to be looked down upon by Ji Tianqing. After a while, Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the Sky City Lord arrived together and landed on the Skyview platform. Yuan Zhen was quick-witted. When he saw the expressions of the martial saints, he guessed that something unpleasant had happened. But he didn't ask too much, so as not to affect the Xinwu Sacred Assembly. "Everyone, today there are 28 young martial saints gathered together. They will enter the Void platform and participate in the martial arts competition. No matter how mysterious and bizarre their words are during the martial arts competition, in the end, they have to rely on their powerful strength to be convincing enough. So, I'm looking forward to the performance of the young martial saints on the Void platform." Yuan Zhen said with a smile, his tone full of expectation. "The martial arts competition will be conducted by drawing lots. 2 pairs will fight. The winner will advance and the loser will be eliminated. 28 young martial saints will participate in the competition. Only the top 5 will be rewarded. As for the people in the square, you can also watch the competition through the 8 illusory light screens. Everyone, I hope that this sacred assembly can be held smoothly and have a happy ending." As his voice fell, the martial arts competition officially began. The hundreds of thousands of warriors in the square all showed excitement and expectation, cheering and shouting. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord personally opened the array of the Skyview platform. Suddenly, the 8 directions of the Skyview platform lit up with dazzling silver light, forming 8 huge light screens. Every light screen showed a pitch-black void. It was the Void platform. Then Yuan Zhen personally used a secret technique, waving his palm and shooting out a dazzling golden light into the heaven viewing platform. Suddenly, the sky above the heaven viewing platform lit up with a resplendent golden light, forming a 10-meter-tall door of light. On the golden door, there were mysterious and profound array patterns that emitted powerful spatial fluctuations. Yuan Zhen took the lead and flew into the sky, stepping into the golden door of light. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord followed closely behind, followed by the 6 veteran martial sages. After they all entered the door of light, Yuan Chong led the young martial sages into the door of light one after another. Shua, Ji Tianqing and Lu Baishuang entered the door of light one after the other. They felt a flash of light in front of them, and then they found themselves in the cold, dark void. The 2 of them stood still in the void and raised their heads to look ahead. They saw Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the others standing on a white light disk with a radius of 10,000 feet. The disk formed by the white light looked like a square, but it also looked like a spatial array. The ground was solid, as tough as a divine artifact. In the center of the white light disk, there was a shining golden door, leading to an unknown place. Except for Ji Tianxing and Wenren Jiusheng, it was not the first time for the others to come to the void platform. Groups of 3 to 5 people were standing on the white disk of light, discussing with each other through telepathy. Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the others were busy counting people and making preparations. Seizing this opportunity, Ji Tianxing looked around and sized up his surroundings. In front of the white light disk was a vast and boundless void. It was dark and cold, without a trace of spiritual qi. However, at the edge of the void, there was a huge golden light screen, which had a radius of 500 miles. The golden light curtain was like a huge ball of light that floated quietly in the void. The 500 miles of void inside the light ball was the famous void platform, which was the arena for the martial arts competition. The void outside the light ball was boundless, full of unknown dangers. In the entire void platform, there was nothing but the white light disk under everyone's feet. Ji Tianxing knew that when the martial arts competition began, the martial saints on the platform would fight fiercely in the void. The rest of the martial saints would watch the battle from the white light disk. The battle in the void would be projected on the 8 light screens in Wuxia City Square through the array, for hundreds of thousands of martial artists to watch. However, the scene on the white light disk would not be projected. After a short few minutes, Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng were ready. Not only did they prepare to draw lots, but they also activated the defensive array of the white light disk to ensure that the aftermath of the battle on the void platform would not affect the others. Yuan Zhen held 28 jade slips in his hand and said to the crowd, "Okay, the 28 young martial saints participating in the martial arts competition, get ready to draw lots. To ensure fairness, Lord Qin and I will not participate in the drawing of lots. We are only responsible for hosting and supervising the martial arts competition. The matter of drawing lots will be left to the 6 martial saints." After saying that, he waved his right hand and threw the 28 jade slips into the air. Swish, swish, swish. After a few breaths, the 28 jade slips spread out and lined up in the air. Each jade slip recorded a young martial saint's name, age, strength, and other information. The covered island master cupped his hands and bowed to the crowd. He said with a smile, "For the first round of the sacred assembly, I will draw lots first. Good luck." After saying that, he waved his hand and shot out 14 golden lights toward the 28 jade slips. Swish, swish, swish. In the blink of an eye, the 28 jade slips were divided into 14 pieces and floated in front of him. He picked up the jade slips in front of him and announced loudly, "For the first round, Martial Saint Chernue will fight against Martial Saint Tianchang. Martial Saint Baishuang will fight against Martial Saint Tianxin. Martial Saint Yuancheng will fight against Martial Saint Rufeng. Martial Saint Tianxing will fight against Martial Saint Lu Kai. Martial Saint Qingshan will fight against." As the covered island master announced the names of the martial saints one after another, the expressions of the more than 20 martial saints became interesting. Some of them looked indifferent and calm. Some of them were full of confidence and smiled. Naturally, there were also some who frowned and looked serious. After all, there was a lot of chance in the drawing of lots. If one was lucky and met a weaker opponent, he would be able to advance to the second round of the competition. However, if the martial saints were unlucky and met a stronger opponent, they would be defeated in the first round and leave the competition. Lu Baishuang frowned and quietly looked at a middle-aged man in the crowd. Her eyes flashed with a hint of seriousness. Ji Tianxing noticed this and asked secretly, "What's wrong? Is there a problem with the drawing of lots?" Chapter 2181. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Lu Baishuang nodded slightly. "Not very strong, but very strong." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "That heaven-heart martial saint, what was his ranking in the last sacred assembly?" "5th. What about you?" "6th. Lu Baishuang said in a low voice with a tinge of unwillingness. "Among the martial saints who came to the sacred assembly, I was ranked the highest, but I couldn't even enter the top 5. Therefore, the Luoshui divine nation has always been criticized as the weakest divine nation. Ji Tianqing was even more confused and asked, "Strange, I saw that the results of the first round were basically a battle between the strong and the weak. There was not much suspense in the outcome. Why is it that when it comes to you, it has become a battle between the strong?" Lu Baishuang shook her head and said in a low voice, "In the last 2 sacred assemblies, I lost to the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. I heard that 10 years ago he mastered a peerless sword technique, and his strength increased by leaps and bounds. This battle, I'm afraid that Ji Tianqing thought for a moment, and his eyes became much colder. He transmitted his voice. "It seems that there is a problem with the results of the draw. It was most likely arranged by Yuanzhen. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was originally stronger than you, and 10 years ago, his strength increased greatly. He definitely had the confidence to defeat you. Yuanzhen did this on purpose to eliminate you in the first round and make you lose face." Lu Baishuang nodded and said indifferently, "They just want to humiliate me. What a despicable person. If I was eliminated in the first round, I would not even be able to enter the top 14. I would become a laughingstock, and the reputation of the Luoshui divine nation would be damaged." Ji Tianqing shook his head and looked at her with a smile. He said in a certain tone, "Don't worry, no matter what schemes they have, don't even think about destroying the reputation of the Luoshui divine nation. What you lost, I will help you get back with interest." Lu Baishuang turned to look at him. After a moment of silence, she nodded seriously and said, "Good. I hope that you can amaze the world with a single brilliant feat and trample everyone under your feet. Only then can you vent your hatred and take revenge on them for surrounding us." Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. At this moment, the first battle was about to begin. A middle-aged man dressed in gray linen clothes and carrying an ancient sword with inscriptions on his back was the first to step into the golden door of light in the middle of the disc. Shua. With a flash of golden light, he left the white light disc and appeared in the void 100 miles away. Evidently, this person was Martial Saint Tianchong, the successor of a hidden sect from the vast divine nation. Martial Saint Chenyu, who was dressed in a long pink dress, smiled sweetly at the martial saints beside her before turning around and flying into the door of light. "Everyone, wait for my triumphant return." Martial Saint Qingshan, Chaoying, and the others all cheered for her. "Martial Saint Chenyue, Martial Saint Tianchong is no match for you. You can easily win. In my opinion, we'll see the result in 15 minutes at most." Martial Saint Chenyu is ranked in the top 10, but Martial Saint Tianchong is at the bottom. In the blink of an eye, Martial Saint Chenyu also left the white light disc and appeared in the void. She stood 10,000 feet away from Martial Saint Tianchong and bowed with a smile. She said in a sweet voice, "Martial Saint Tianchong, my body is weak. Please go easy on me." Not only was her voice sweet and charming, but her eyes were also filled with seduction. If it were anyone else, they would have accepted it for the sake of dignity and politeness. However, Martial Saint Tianchong was very old-fashioned. He said expressionlessly, "Martial Saint Chenyue, you must be joking. You're a martial saint ranked in the top 10. How can I not use my full strength?" Martial Saint Chenyue's face immediately turned cold. She snorted and said, "Humph, you're so ungentlemanly. Since that's the case, I won't hold back." As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her arms and waved her pink embroidered sleeves. She shot out 99 dark red roses toward Martial Saint Tianchong. The sky full of roses pierced through the void, blooming with a captivating red brilliance, looking extremely dazzling and gorgeous. However, the 99 Japanese roses were all condensed from magic power and contained terrifying power. Martial Saint Tianchong did not dare to be careless. He hurriedly took out the ancient inscripted sword on his back and assumed a defensive posture. He formed a sword seal with his left hand and waved the ancient silver sword with his right. Cold sword light filled the sky and formed a sword net in front of him. The two of them started to fight. They each displayed their strengths. Lights flew everywhere in the void and colorful shockwaves kept bursting out. Boom, boom, boom. The loud noise reverberated on the void platform, causing layers of ripples to appear in the dark void. One after another, shockwaves washed over the white disk like waves of the sea. Fortunately, the white light disc had a protective shield that blocked the power of the shock waves. Many martial saints were watching the battle on the disc, and were not affected at all. In the square of Wuxia City, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were focused on the silver light screen. The scene on the void platform was clearly displayed on the light screen that was thousands of feet long. Seeing Tianzhong and Qinyu, the two martial sages, fighting to the point where light splashed everywhere, and the light of magic filled the sky, the numerous cultivators also cheered one after another as they discussed in high spirits. Martial Saint Qinyu is indeed a peerless beauty. Not only is she beautiful and strong, even her magic power is magnificent. It really makes people admire her. Martial Saint Tianchang's sword technique seems to have originated from a hidden sect in the ancient times. He has the demeanor of a peerless master. It's a pity that Martial Saint Qinyu has always had the upper hand. Her strength is obviously stronger than Martial Saint Tianchang. Wow. Martial Saint Tianchang's sword technique was so exciting. It really made people gasp in amazement. It's a pity that the light screen can only see the scene on the void platform, but not hear the sound. If we could hear the sound of their battle, it would be even more exciting, right? In the huge square, discussions and exclamations sounded one after another. It was very lively. The mood of the hundreds of thousands of martial artists also rose and fell with the battle on the void platform. Unknowingly, half an hour passed. Martial Saint Qinyu and Martial Saint Tianchang had also fought over 10,000 moves. Their magic power was greatly depleted. The battle came to an end. Martial Saint Qinyu's face was slightly pale. Her long hair was a little messy, and her hair bun and headdress were messy. There were also 4 long and narrow wounds on her arms and shoulders, from which dark red blood was constantly seeping out. However, Martial Saint Tianchang's situation was even worse. His hair was disheveled and his clothes were ragged. His entire body was stained with blood. His magic power aura was also very chaotic. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. Both sides used all their strength to fight over 100 moves. In the end, Martial Saint Tianchang was sent flying backward. He vomited blood and fell into the void. His soul was injured and his consciousness was blurry. Before he could regain his consciousness, Martial Saint Qinyu teleported in front of him and held 2 sabers to his neck. Martial Saint Tianchang, thank you for letting me win. Martial Saint Qinyu's lips curled into a cold smile. She raised her hands and kept her sabers. Then she turned and left. Chapter 2182. The first battle ended with Martial Saint Qinyu winning. This result was within the expectations of many martial saints. Everyone was surprised that Martial Saint Tianchang could last half an hour against Martial Saint Qinyu before being defeated. This was already a great improvement. In the square of Sky-Gazing City, hundreds of thousands of cultivators were discussing animatedly, still reminiscing about the exciting battle from before. At this moment, the second battle began. A middle-aged man in a sapphire blue robe with rings all over his fingers walked out of the crowd. This man was Martial Saint Tianxian. He was 7 feet tall, and had an ordinary appearance. He was fat like a rich man in the secular world and had a mustache. Walking to the light gate in the middle of the round plate, he turned to look at Lu Baishuang and revealed a cold smile. Then he stepped into the light gate and appeared in the void. After entering the void, his every move was displayed in front of hundreds of thousands of martial artists. He suddenly changed his appearance. His expression was gentle and kind. Ji Tianqing looked at Lu Baishuang and said, "Don't be nervous. Just do your best. Don't worry about the result." Lu Baishuang looked at him with gratitude. She stepped out of the crowd and stepped into the light gate. Swoosh! A golden light flashed and she appeared in the void. She stood 10 miles away from Martial Saint Tianxian. The two looked at each other and bowed. Martial Saint Tianxian smiled and said, "Martial Saint Baishuang, I didn't expect to meet you in the first round. I know that you have been defeated by me for 2 consecutive rounds, and can only be ranked 6th. You are very unwilling. Now is the time for you to wash away your shame. Don't miss it." Lu Baishuang said expressionlessly, "I don't need you to say more. I will do my best." Martial Saint Tianxian smiled and said, That's good. I will also do my best to show my respect to you. However, swords have no eyes. You have to be careful. If you can't withstand it, you should admit defeat early. Otherwise, you will be hurt by me and our friendship will be damaged. On the surface, he appeared to be very amiable, but his words had a hidden meaning. However, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in sky-gazing city square could only see his expression, but not hear his voice. Lu Baishuang's face was filled with disgust as he frowned. Unwilling to speak with him any further, he coldly shouted, "Enough nonsense, take this." As she spoke, she took out a 4-foot-long silver-white scimitar and slashed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint with a saber light that could split the heavens and earth. Fleeting frost moon. The 1,000-meter-long silver-white saber light was like a stream of starlight, and also like a crescent moon. It emitted a bone-chilling cold chi with boundless power. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint also stopped smiling. He took out a palm-sized black treasure sword and stabbed out 3 fiery red giant swords. Pung pung pung. The red flame greatsword collided with the silver saber light with a deafening boom. The sword radiance and the saber radiance shattered at the same time, turning into millions of fragments that scattered in the void, like fireflies dancing in the sky on a summer night. It was quite beautiful. As soon as the two of them exchanged blows, they used all of their strength, not daring to underestimate their opponent. All kinds of secret techniques and mysterious spells were cast one after another, creating illusions and shadows that covered the sky and the sun. The void within a few hundred miles was lit up by the radiance of Dharma powers. The aftermath of the battle created huge waves and hurricanes in the void, spreading outwards and attacking the white light disk. On the disk, many martial sages were engrossed in the battle and commented from time to time. Not only were the young martial sages surprised and envious of the techniques of Lu Baishuang and the Heaven Heart Martial Saint, even the senior martial sages nodded their heads as they watched, revealing looks of admiration. As expected of the 5th and 6th ranked martial sages, both of them have a deep understanding of the martial way and can use hundreds of Dharma spells to perfection. That's right. Regardless of whether it is the saber technique of Saint Emperor Baishuang or the sword technique of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint, they are both perfect and flawless. They can start a sect and teach for thousands of years. From the looks of it, the two of them are equally matched. It will be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Xian Shan Martial Saint, Granny Yulong and the others all had gratified expressions as they discussed calmly. Wenren Jiusheng, who had always been silent, shook his head and said with a regretful expression, "It looks like it is difficult to determine the winner, but the winner has already been decided." When Yuan Zhen heard this, he immediately raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "Oh, who does Senior Jiusheng think will win?" Wenren Jiusheng did not beat around the bush and said directly, "Of course it will be the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. He looks like he is going all out, but he is actually hiding a secret technique. The winner will be revealed in at most 15 minutes. Yuan Zhen nodded his head and could not help but smile. He had a higher opinion of Wenren Jiusheng in his heart. Haha, this guy has sharp eyes. He can see through the truth. He is indeed capable. Looks like he is more useful than those old guys. I have to test him 2 more times to see if he can take on great responsibilities." Very quickly, 15 minutes had passed. The result was just as Wenren Jiusheng had said. Seeing that Lu Baishuang had used up more than half of his Dharma powers, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint did not hold back and used his Dharma spells. Heaven Shocking Sword Rain. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint suddenly shouted coldly. He held the sword with both hands and slashed at Lu Baishuang. Suddenly, his body surged with flames that covered the sky, condensing into thousands of flaming swords that pierced towards Lu Baishuang from the sky. Lu Baishuang was already heavily injured and her Dharma powers were also quite weak. She did not have time to dodge, and was drowned by the flaming swords. Bang 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 bang. A series of muffled sounds exploded and reverberated in the void platform. Ji Tianxing frowned and a look of worry flashed across his eyes. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian's faces also changed, revealing a look of deep worry. However, they could only worry in their hearts and could not interfere in the battle on the platform. After a long time, the flames that covered the sky dissipated, Lu Baishuang's figure appeared. Her hair was disheveled and her body was covered in blood. She stood in the void platform, panting violently. Her clothes were tattered, and the saint's soft armor she wore was also shattered. Blood kept flowing out of her nose and mouth. Especially in front of her chest, there was a bloody hole the size of a bowl. It was clear from front to back, and one could vaguely see her heart in her chest. Just a little more and her heart would have been pierced by the sword light, and her body would have died on the spot. After suffering such a heavy injury, she no longer had the strength to fight, and could only angrily admit defeat. Heaven Heart Martial Saint, you are indeed ruthless. I admit defeat. Her left hand covered her chest, and her right hand held the saber as she said in a low and hoarse voice. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint smiled and said with a kind tone, "Sai, it was not my intention to hurt you like this. I've reminded you before, but unfortunately, you refused to admit defeat. I can't do anything about it." Chapter 2183. On the white light disk, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were so angry that their faces turned green. They could not help but curse. Heaven Heart Martial Saint is such a despicable hypocrite. He suddenly unleashed his ultimate move, and almost destroyed Holy Emperor Baishuang's physical body. After that, he still dares to make sarcastic remarks. Not far away, Yuan Cheng and Martial Saint Qingshan looked at Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian. What are the two of you talking about? How can you slander Heaven Heart Martial Saint like this? In the arena, swords and sabers have no eyes. Life and death are common, let alone injuries? Baishuang Martial Saint admitted defeat due to her injuries. She can only blame herself for being weaker. How can she blame others like the two of you? Prince Yuan Cheng is right. If everyone is as cowardly as the two of you, why would they participate in the martial arts sparring competition? You should feel lucky that Heaven Heart Martial Saint has already shown mercy. Otherwise, Holy Emperor Baishuang's physical body would have been destroyed. Instead of thanking Heaven Heart Martial Saint, you are slandering him. You really don't know what's good for you. Yuan Cheng, Martial Saint Qingshan and the rest looked dignified. However, they were laughing coldly in their hearts. Although the other young martial saints of the Heaven in Divine Nation did not say anything, they also had gloating looks on their faces. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were furious. They wanted to argue with Yuan Cheng and the rest. At this moment, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said expressionlessly, "Mingqi Changtian, there's no need to say any more." Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian could only keep quiet. They transmitted their voices to Ji Tianqing. "Young Master Ji, they are too much. How can there be such shameless bastards?" Looking at their gloating faces, "I can't wait to give them a good beating," Ji Tianqing said coldly. "Remember what they said just now. Soon I will make them swallow it all back. The injuries that Baishuang suffered, I will make them suffer 10 times more." His tone was cold and dignified. There was no room for doubt. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian's bodies shook. Their eyes were filled with hope. Good. With young Master Ji's words, we can rest assured. They purposely humiliated Holy Emperor Baishuang. They will definitely bully us later. However, with young Master Ji around, we have nothing to fear. Soon Lu Baishuang returned to the white disk. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian hurriedly supported her and returned to Ji Tianqing's side. Her injuries were extremely severe, and her aura was extremely weak. Her beautiful face was stained with blood, and her lips were as pale as paper. She looked up at Ji Tianqing and said in a hoarse voice, "In the end, I still let you down." Ji Tianqing shook his head and comforted her. "No, don't think too much. Let me help you heal first." With that, he put his palms together and channeled his magic power, releasing a rich green light into Lu Baishuang's body. The green light flowed through her body and quickly healed her wounds, as well as her broken bone marrow and meridians. The wounds all over her body were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were both relieved and shocked. Ji Tianqing did not have time to care about anything else as he focused on channeling his magic power and chatting with Lu Baishuang. After an hour of treatment, Lu Baishuang's injuries were finally healed. Her body seemed to be in good shape, and she seemed to have regained some energy. However, She had only recovered 60% to 70% of her strength, and she still needed a few more years to fully recover. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression and said guiltily, "You are about to go up the stage, and you shouldn't have helped me heal and wasted your magic power. I didn't want to drag you down, but I have caused you trouble." Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. "It's okay. Using some magic power won't affect me from beating those bastards up." "That's good." Lu Baishuang was relieved and the guilt in her heart lessened. The two of them stopped talking and looked at the void in front of them. In the past hour, another 4 pairs of martial sages had gone up the stage to battle. Among them were Taihao Yunqi and Mu Changtian. Taihao Yunqi had been in second place for 3 consecutive sacred gatherings, and his strength was second only to Yuan Chong. His opponent was a low-level martial sage, who only had the strength of a level 3 martial sage. The two of them exchanged more than 100 blows, and Taihao Yunqi defeated his opponent easily. As for Mu Changtian, his opponent's strength was on par with his. The two of them fought for 15 minutes before the victor was decided. Mu Changtian had suffered heavy injuries and barely won. At that moment, the two martial sages fighting in the void were Yuan Chong and martial sage Ru Feng. Yuan Chong was publicly acknowledged as the #1 martial sage, and his strength was great. Martial sage Ru Feng was only a level 4 martial sage, and could not defeat Yuan Chong. However, he was still a martial sage and could not give up before the battle. Even if it was for his dignity, he had to exchange a few blows with Yuan Chong. The two of them exchanged 3 blows, and Yuan Chong stood in the void without moving, and martial sage Ru Feng spat out blood and flew back. Martial Saint Ru Feng very tactfully admitted defeat, and even complimented Yuan Chong. Yuan Chong looked disinterested as he turned around and left with an arrogant expression. Next, it was Ji Tianqing's turn to fight martial sage Lu Quebec. Ji Tianqing calmly walked out of the crowd, and walked towards the light door in the middle of the round plate. Martial sage Lu Ke was a skinny young man with a thin face, and his aura was sinister. Moreover, he was a martial sage of the Heaven and Holy Kingdom, and had once served under Yuan Zhen. He glanced at Ji Tianqing's back, and his mouth curled into a cold smile as he walked out of the crowd. At that moment, Yuan Chong suddenly sent a voice transmission to him. "Lu Ke, remember my words. You must make him pay the price." Lu Ke's footsteps paused, and he replied without turning his head. "Fourth Highness, don't worry. Although I am not his match, I will not let him win easily. With those 2 trump cards in hand, even if I lose, I will make him suffer a great loss." Yuan Chong did not say much, and he nodded at him. Lu Ke did not hesitate, and his figure flashed into the light door, appearing in the void. He and Ji Tianqing were 10 miles apart, and they stood in the void facing each other. Neither of them bowed, and they did not even exchange basic greetings. Ji Tianqing even glanced at him, and he did not even have the interest to talk. Lu Ke was not angry, and he said with a cold smile, "Ji Tianqing, I have long heard that you are arrogant, and I have seen it for myself these few days. I did not expect that I would have the chance to fight with you. Haha, I would like to see how capable you are, and how dare you boast that you are the #1 genius of the human race." Ji Tianqing glanced at him indifferently, and said in a low voice, "You are just a clown." Arrogant. Lu Ke snorted, and he immediately took out a golden sword, and was about to perform his unique swordsmanship. However, at that moment, Ji Tianqing snapped his fingers. Whoosh! All of a sudden, a 1,000-foot-long starry sword appeared in front of Lu Ke out of thin air. His eyes widened, and his face was full of horror. Before he could react, the star sword had already struck him head-on. Chapter 2184. Bam! Amidst the deafening noise, Lu Ke was sent flying back by the starry sword. Silver light burst out and dark red blood splattered in the void, mixed with a pile of rags and armor fragments. Lu Ke was sent flying backward for a full 50 miles before he fell into the void, his body twitching and rolling on the ground. This sword had blasted him into a bloody mess, full of cracks and gaps, like a broken porcelain bowl. Even his left leg had turned into pieces of bone and flesh, dissipating in the void. His injuries were too horrible to look at. He lay in the void, screaming and unable to stand up. However, compared to the shock and horror in his mind, the pain in his body was nothing. Until now he still couldn't believe how Ji Tianxing did it. He had just drawn his sword and hadn't even used his unique swordsmanship when Ji Tianxing summoned a giant sword and sent him flying. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing didn't even draw his sword. He just snapped his fingers. What kind of swordsmanship was that? Wasn't it too weird? Liu Ke only felt that his consciousness was blurred and his mind was blank. He was a little confused. At this time, Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and came in front of him. Looking down at him from above, he said with an indifferent expression, "Admit defeat or die." Liu Ke suddenly sobered up. He raised his blood-stained face and looked at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's eyes were cold and indifferent, without any emotion, as if he was looking down at an ant. However, what Liu Ke felt was not humiliation or anger, but deep fear. He had no doubt that even if Ji Tianxing didn't have a sword in his hand, he could end his life with just a snap of his fingers. Thinking of this, he said without hesitation, "I admit defeat." He spoke quickly, for fear that he would be killed by Ji Tianxing if he hesitated for a moment. When he shouted, "I admit defeat," Ji Tianxing withdrew his cold eyes and turned to leave. The invisible killing intent that enveloped Liu Ke suddenly dissipated. Liu Ke heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He hurriedly supported his severely injured body and left the void platform as if he was fleeing. When he returned to the white light disk and flew to the side of Marshal Saint Qingshan and the others, the martial saints were still in shock and astonishment. Not only were more than 20 young martial saints stunned, but even the senior martial saints, Yuan Jun, Qin Zheng, and the others were shocked. When everyone came to their senses, Yuan Jun and Qin Zheng's expressions became very gloomy. They were secretly discussing something with each other. Marshal Saint Qingshan, Chaoying, and the others couldn't help but exclaim and whisper, "What's going on? Is it over?" Liu Quebec. I think Ji Tianxing didn't even use his sword. He only raised his hand. How could he use such a powerful sword technique? What's terrifying is not the power of the sword light, but so many of us, but we didn't see how Ji Tianxing did it. It seems that we can't underestimate him. He's famous. How can he not have some real skills? Many young martial sages discussed among themselves. Their expressions became grave and cautious. Yuan Chong was silent. His expression was extremely ugly, and his eyes were as cold as ice. He stared at Liu Ke, who was covered in blood, and shouted, "Liu Ke, what the hell are you doing? Why didn't you attack?" Liu Ke was also very depressed. He explained weakly, "Your Highness, I've made my move, but his speed is too fast." Yuan Chong was even angrier. He scolded in a sharp tone, "You trash, have you forgotten my instructions? Didn't I ask you to use those 2 trump cards?" Liu Ke was suddenly speechless. He hesitated for a moment, and then explained regretfully, "Your Highness, I didn't expect his strength to be so terrifying. Originally, I wanted to exchange a few moves with him, and then take the opportunity to use my trump cards. But I didn't expect. He only used 1 move to seriously injure me. In front of him, I didn't even have the chance to use those 2 trump cards." Yuan Chong was so angry that his body trembled. His eyes were surging with cold light. He couldn't help but curse. "Useless trash. Who do you think you are? You still want to exchange a few moves with him? Forget it, you heal first. I'll settle this with you when we get back." Liu Ke's face was full of fear. He didn't dare to say anything more, and quickly sat on the ground to heal his injuries. At this time, another pair of young martial saints went up to the void platform and started to fight. One of them was Marshal Saint Qingshan. His opponent was a young man who was only a rank 4 martial saint. The result of the fight was obvious. Marshal Saint Qingshan won, and it only took half an hour. After their fight, a few more martial saints went up to the void platform to fight. Although the fight between the martial saints was very intense, it was very exciting. But because of the previous incident, the crowd didn't care about it. Everyone's attention was placed on the few strongest martial saints, and they were looking forward to the fight between them. For example, Yuan Chong, Taihao Yunqi, Ji Tianxing, and Marshal Saint Qingshan. After an hour, the first round of fights finally ended. After this round of fights, 14 of the 28 young martial saints advanced to the next round. The other 14 were defeated in the first round, and could only stay on the white light disc to heal their injuries, or continue to watch the fights. Every sacred assembly only decided the top 5. There was no need for these defeated martial sages to continue fighting. Yuan Zhen announced loudly, "The first round of fights has ended. The list of people who have advanced is as follows. Chen Yu Tian Xian Chaoying Taihao Yunqi, Taihao Jiujiu, Muchang Tian, Yuan Cheng, Ji Tianxing, Qing Shan. These 14 martial saints have 2 hours to rest. After 2 hours, the second round of fights will begin." After that, he didn't say anything else and started to communicate with Qin Zheng. It was unknown what he said, but Qin Zheng listened expressionlessly and occasionally glanced at Ji Tianxing. On the other side, Yuan Cheng, Martial Saint Qing Shan, and the others had gathered together, and were secretly discussing something. It was probably because Ji Tianxing's performance just now had exceeded everyone's expectations, and made Yuan Cheng and the others feel even more pressured. At this moment, the martial saints of the Heaven-End Divine Nation were extremely wary and hostile towards Ji Tianxing. Gathering together for a secret meeting, they were probably discussing how to deal with the situation. Ji Tianxing was well aware of this, but he was too lazy to look at them. He stood in the field with an indifferent expression, and silently adjusted his breathing. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Changtian felt that the atmosphere was not right and couldn't help but remind him. Young Master Ji, looking at Yuan Cheng and Martial Saint Qing Shan's expressions, "I'm afraid they are discussing how to deal with you. Your performance just now was too shocking and gave them a lot of pressure. They are already feeling uneasy." Chapter 2185. Lu Baishuang, Mu Changtian and the other 2 were worried for Ji Tianxing. They knew that with Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength, he could crush everyone. Even Yuan Cheng, who was ranked first, could be defeated by him. But they were still worried. After all, Yuan Cheng, Martial Saint Qing Shan, and the others were from Heaven-End God Nation. They would work together to deal with Ji Tianxing. Next, Ji Tianxing would have to fight a few more battles. If he used up a lot of magic power in every battle, he might even suffer some serious injuries. In the end, it would be difficult to recover, and his strength would be greatly reduced. For example, Lu Baishuang might not even be able to defeat a martial saint in his injured state. However, Lu Baishuang and the other 2's advice didn't seem to have much effect. Ji Tianxing just nodded and said calmly, "I know, you don't have to worry. No matter what schemes, in front of absolute strength, they are useless." Since he said so, Lu Baishuang and the other 2 naturally couldn't say anything more. Ji Tianxing was also silent. He closed his eyes, as if he was resting. But in fact, he was communicating with White Dragon using his divine soul. During this period of time, White Dragon had been in the Sword World with Lan Kuan. The 2 of them went to peaceful Earth City, and fought with the Xitigarbha godly armor in the mountains. As for the final result, it was naturally Lan Kuan who won. He beat up the Xitigarbha divine armor, and vented his anger. After all, it had White Dragon's help and guidance. Fortunately, the Xitigarbha godly armor's skin was thick and its defense was extremely strong. It was fine after being beaten up. Feeling wronged, it went back underground and rested for 10 days to half a month. Then it was as good as new. After this incident, White Dragon and Lan Kuan's relationship was much better. In addition, during this period of time, the White Dragon taught him many things and told him many miraculous legends, which made Lan Kuan dizzy. Now Lan Kuan had been brainwashed by him and recognized and respected him. White Dragon's temper had always been restless. When it was tired of playing in the Sword World, it begged Ji Tianxing to come out for a breath of fresh air. "Master, are you currently participating in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly?" Was he fighting with a bunch of martial saints again? Such an exciting scene. How could you not let your disciple witness your elegance? Don't worry, your disciple will definitely know his place and won't cause you any trouble. You just have to beat up those martial saints. Your disciple will cheer for you. The White Dragon's voice sounded in Ji Tianxing's mind. Its tone was filled with excitement and anticipation. However, Ji Tianxing refused and said in a calm tone, Now that my identity has been exposed and the news has spread, the whole world knows about it. Lu Baishuang looked at the white dragon carefully and said, "Stop talking. It is not young Master Ji's pet. It is a divine soul. It should be young Master Ji's follower." The white dragon's anger dissipated. It looked at Lu Baishuang seriously and said with a gratified smile, "Well, this little sister has good taste and insight. Little sister, I think you are pretty and kind. Standing next to my master, you look like a good match. Why don't you let my master take you as his concubine?" Lu Baishuang was stunned. She stared at the white dragon. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also speechless. They looked at the white dragon strangely. Ji Tianqing couldn't help but frown. He stretched out a finger and flicked the white dragon's head. He scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. Did you forget what I told you?" The white dragon smiled awkwardly and nodded. "Master, please don't be angry. I was just joking with this little sister." Lu Baishuang suppressed her anger and ignored the white dragon. She looked at Ji Tianqing seriously and asked, "Young Master Ji, is this your disciple?" "Yes." Ji Tianqing nodded and explained seriously. "I picked him up on the side of the road. Seeing that he was pitiful, I took him as my disciple and taught him. Unfortunately, he was severely injured and almost died. He is only a remnant divine soul. It's all because he was injured too badly and hurt his head. That's why he is a little crazy and always talking nonsense." Chapter 2186. Ji Tianqing's words made Bai Long want to cry, but no tears came out. He looked at Ji Tianqing pitifully and transmitted his voice. "Master, no wonder you agreed to let me out. So you have already arranged such an identity and background for me? Can't we put it in a better way?" Ji Tianqing glanced at him and transmitted his voice. "Let's see if you still dare to talk nonsense." "I don't dare anymore. Master, please let me off." Bai Long humbly accepted the lesson. Ji Tianqing finally let him off, and did not continue to make things difficult for him. Soon 2 hours passed. After the break, Yuan Zhen announced the second round of drawing lots. He waved his hand and shot out 14 jade slips, which flew into the air and danced in the air. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 14 identity jade slips were quickly disrupted and quietly floated in the air. The mountain exploring martial saint stepped out of the crowd and said with a solemn expression, "Let me draw the lots for the second round." After saying that, he flicked his 10 fingers and shot out 7 golden lights. Each golden light wrapped around 2 jade slips and flew to him. The drawing of lots was completed quickly. He picked up the jade slips in front of him and announced in a dignified voice, "The second round of drawing lots is completed. The results are as follows: Tian Xian against Ping Hu, Tai Hao Yunqi against Ru Song, Chao Ying against Mu Changtian, Qinyue against Ji Tianqing, Qingshan against Tai Hao Jiujiu, Yuan Chong against." A total of 14 young martial saints were divided into 7 pairs, and went up the stage to fight. After the mountain scouting martial saint finished reading everyone's names, the expressions of the martial saints changed subtly. Many people were looking at their opponents. Some of them were confident in their victory, while some of them were cautious and alert. Ji Tianqing's expression was calm, without any fluctuations. However, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian smiled. The heavens really have eyes. Qinyue actually went up against young Master Ji. That vicious and hateful woman is finally going to fall. Young Master Ji, we all know that you have the demeanor of a grandmaster. You're magnanimous and don't beat up women. However, please don't stick to the rules when it comes to martial Saint Qinyue. Ji Tianqing hadn't said anything yet, but White Dragon had already heard the clues. He looked at Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian with sparkling eyes and said in a playful tone, "Oh, this is interesting. What happened before? Do you hate martial Saint Qinyue that much?" Zhuo Mingqi quickly explained. Previously on the heaven-gazing platform, Martial Saint Qinyue publicly slandered Holy Emperor Bai Shuang in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Martial Saint Qinyue is a vixen who uses her looks to please others, but she thinks that other women are like her. "Oh, I see." Bai Long suddenly came to a realization. He sneered and said, Haha, this little girl is really vicious. She insulted my chastity in public. It's like taking my life. Sherzuan, beat her to death in a moment. You don't need to have tender feelings for the fairer sex, and you don't need to give me face. Ji Tianxing, Lu Baishuang and the others frowned and looked at him in confusion. Bai Long was stunned for a moment. Then he explained embarrassedly, cough cough. I looked around just now and saw that Marshal Saint Chernue is quite pretty. Her coquettish manner was a little flirtatious. I was thinking if I should take her in as a servant so that she could wash my feet or massage my body. Since she's so vicious, then forget it. I don't like trash like her. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were all stunned. After regaining their senses, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian couldn't help but mutter. This guy really dares to talk. He's so arrogant, as expected of young Master Ji's disciple. Marshal Saint Chernue seems to be Yuan Chang's little lover, but he wants to take her in as a servant. Such lawlessness, they really come from the same origin. Lu Baishuang thought for a moment and understood. She muttered to herself. There's really something wrong with his head. He's always talking nonsense. Her voice wasn't loud, but Bai Long heard it clearly. He was at a loss for words. Just as the few of them were muttering, the second round of the competition began. Heaven Heart Marshal Saint and Calm Lake Marshal Saint stepped onto the void platform. Calm Lake Marshal Saint came from the vast god kingdom. He was a white-haired middle-aged man who was already over 900 years old. This was his last time participating in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. In another 50 years, he would be 1,000 years old, and would no longer be qualified. Although he was a level 5 Martial Saint, he was still no match for Heaven Heart Martial Saint. The two of them exchanged over 1,000 blows in the void. Heaven Heart Martial Saint heavily injured him, and he fell into the void. Calm Lake Martial Saint could only admit defeat and retreat with a dejected expression. Immediately after, the second round of the competition began. Taihao Yunqi versus Marshal Saint Rusong. Taihao Yunqi had been in second place for many consecutive sacred assemblies. His strength and spells were so strong that only Yuan Chong could beat him. There was no suspense in this battle, and it ended after 15 minutes. Marshal Saint Rusong was defeated and admitted defeat on the spot. Taihao Yunqi won the battle, but he was neither arrogant nor rash and was very elegant. In the third round of the competition, Mu Changtian had no choice but to step onto the void platform. His opponent was Marshal Saint Chaoying, a young lady in a green robe with a crown on her head. She was the beloved disciple of Marshal Saint Xianshan. Although Chaoying's strength was the same as Mu Changtian's, a level 5 Martial Saint. However, Chaoying came from a hidden sect and had been taught by Marshal Saint Xianshan. She had also obtained ancient martial arts and had cultivated a mysterious secret technique. Both of them had only exchanged a few blows when Mu Changtian was forced to retreat by Chaoying. Although he adjusted his defensive stance and tried his best to fight with Chaoying, he was still at a disadvantage, and it was difficult for him to gain the upper hand. The two of them fought intensely in the void. Radiance shot out in all directions, and the sky was filled with dazzling lights. After 15 minutes, Mu Changtian had more than 10 wounds on his body. He had exhausted too much of his powers, and was sent flying by Chaoying's palm. His strength had decreased greatly and the aura of his soul was in a mess. However, Chaoying did not give him a chance to recover. Moreover, Chaoying was still calm and had only used 30 to 40% of her powers. It was obvious that she was more skilled. Mu Changtian was also straightforward as he admitted defeat calmly and retreated. At this point, 3 out of the 4 young martial sages of the Luo River Holy Kingdom had been eliminated. Only Ji Tianxing was left fighting alone. No one knew how far he could go and what ranking he would obtain. After Mu Changtian and Chaoying's battle ended, it was Ji Tianxing and Chen Yu's turn to go up the stage. Ji Tianxing calmly stepped into the light door and appeared on the void platform. Chen Yu followed closely behind. After entering the void, they stood 1,000 feet away from each other. She stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and said in a venomous tone, Ji Tianxing, previously on the heaven-gazing platform, you insulted me in front of everyone. I will never forget this. Now that I finally have the chance to take revenge personally, I will definitely make you pay the price in blood. Ji Tianxing glanced at her indifferently, and did not bother to pay attention to her. The white dragon floating on his shoulder sneered and said in a disdainful tone, "Oh, little girl, you have a big mouth. How dare you talk to my master like that?" Chapter 2187. Bai Long looked askance at Marshal Saint Chenyu. His mouth was full of strange words. Marshal Saint Chenyu's expression changed immediately. She looked at Bai Long sharply, and could not help but frown. "What the hell is this? How dare you humiliate me?" Bai Long stared back at her and shouted coldly, "Hey little girl, how dare you stare at me? What's the big deal about humiliating you? I want to beat you up." Marshal Saint Chenyu's expression turned gloomy. She looked at Ji Tianxing with a cold smile and said, "Hee hee. Ji Tianxing, I didn't expect you to be so despicable on the surface. A crooked stick will have a crooked shadow. You have a guy with a mouthful of filthy words by your side. I can see how you teach him." Bai Long was so angry that he glared at her and shouted, "You little girl, you're too arrogant. How dare you teach my master a lesson? Master, don't talk nonsense with her. Teach her a lesson." Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to attack. He reached out his left hand and held Bai Long in his palm. He said through voice transmission, "Don't be so ostentatious to avoid arousing suspicion. Go back and wait for a while." When he finished speaking, Bai Long had been kept in the sword world. At this moment, Marshal Saint Chenyu saw that he was distracted and a murderous intent flashed in her eyes. Without any hesitation, she raised her hands and formed a mysterious hand seal, using an ultimate secret technique, Soul Slayer. As she shouted coldly, she slammed her palms toward Ji Tianxing. Dark red flames filled the sky. This soul-killing fatal blow was her trump card, and she had always used it in public before. An earth-shattering dark red light curtain descended from the sky and enveloped Ji Tianxing, sealing off an area of 100 miles. The strange red light had the power to corrode one's spiritual soul. Even a top-notch martial saint could not resist it. Marshal Saint Chenyu knew that she was no match for Ji Tianxing. She could only take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Moreover, she would not be as stupid as Liu Kei and make the same mistake. She used her most powerful secret skill. She only wanted to injure Ji Tianxing severely before killing him. Most importantly, in the dark red light curtain that covered the sky, there was a finger-long black needle that was as thin as a hair. The black needle's aura was extremely sinister, but it was also very hidden, making it impossible to guard against. This strange black needle was the saint weapon that Yuan Chong had given her. It was called Extreme Poison. This needle was refined by the two saint refiners of the Heaven and Divine Nation after 10 years of hard work. Furthermore, it had been refined by over 1,000 rare poisons. It was extremely vicious. Once the divine soul was pierced by the poisonous needles, it would corrode and fester. There was absolutely no cure. At this moment, Marshal Saint Chenyu finally regained her senses. However, the speed at which the extremely poisonous black needle flew back was 3 times faster than before. Although she realized that something was wrong and her eyes were filled with fear and despair, she subconsciously wanted to teleport away to avoid it. However, it was too late. Poof! A soft thud was heard. The extremely poisonous black needle instantly pierced through her glabella and deeply into her head, piercing into her spiritual soul. A drop of dark red blood spurted out from her glabella. Marshal Saint Chenyu's body shook and her face turned pale. She could not help but fly backward. On the white light disk, Yuan Chong and the other martial saints witnessed the scene with their own eyes. Instantly they were shocked. They did not know that the black needle was extremely poisonous and had the effect of corroding one's spiritual soul. However, even if the needle was an ordinary Dharma treasure, it could still kill Marshal Saint Chenyu when it pierced her head. Only Yuan Chong knew how terrifying and vicious the power of the extremely poisonous black needle was. Therefore, his expression was the most terrible. His eyes were filled with fear and anger. "No!" Yuan Chong roared subconsciously. His body emitted a strong killing intent, and his eyes turned blood red. At this moment, he was overwhelmed by anger and killing intent and almost lost his mind. He could not wait to rush into the void platform and kill Ji Tianxing personally to avenge Marshal Saint Chenyu. However, Yuan Jun sensed that something was wrong. He immediately sent a voice transmission to Yuancheng and shouted, "Yuancheng, don't be rash. If you rush into the void platform now, won't you be giving others an excuse?" The two brothers were both vicious. However, Yuanzhen was more shrewd and could keep his composure. When Yuancheng heard his brother's cold shout, he instantly sobered up. He was filled with rage and stared at Ji Tianxing with killing intent. Only then did he try his best to suppress the anger in his heart. Chapter 2188. On the void platform. Marshal Saint Chenyue floated quietly in the void. Blood kept flowing out of her nose and mouth as she let out a muffled groan. Her clothes and hair accessories were still intact. She still looked dignified and did not look disheveled at all. Judging from her appearance, she seemed to be unscathed. However, in reality, the poisonous black needle had already pierced into her divine soul. The pink divine soul in her mind had already been corroded by the poison and turned black. Her consciousness had also fallen into a coma. The extremely complicated poison was crazily corroding her divine soul and robbing her of her soul power. Her life was hanging by a thread. Ji Tianxing flew closer and glanced at her with an indifferent expression. He muttered to himself, "Such a vicious hidden weapon. You really brought this upon yourself. You can't live with it." He did not have the slightest bit of pity for such a vicious woman. Fortunately, he was prepared and was strong enough to destroy Marshal Saint Chenyue's scheme. Otherwise, he would have suffered the same fate as Marshal Saint Chenyue if he was hit by the poisonous black needle. At this moment, Yuancheng, who was on the white light disc, shouted anxiously, "Marshal Saint Chenyue admits defeat. Ji Tianxing, why aren't you leaving?" He knew very well that Marshal Saint Chenyue's life was hanging by a thread. As long as Ji Tianxing moved his finger, Marshal Saint Chenyue would be completely killed. On the void platform, Ji Tianxing heard Yuancheng's voice and turned his head to glance at him. Actually, he did not need to guess to know that Marshal Saint Chenyue's despicable method was most likely related to Yuancheng. Now that he saw Yuancheng so anxious and angry, he was even more certain of his guess. Soon, Yuancheng personally entered the void platform and carried the unconscious Marshal Saint Chenyue to check on her injuries. Seeing that her divine soul had already festered and was badly damaged and corroded by the poison, Yuancheng's heart was bleeding. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianxing and shouted with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianxing, you damned bastard, you're so vicious. Chenyue only offended you verbally and you actually want to kill her." Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, "I'm just giving her a taste of her own medicine. She was the one who was vicious. Of course, she was just a stupid chess piece. The one who really deserves to die is the mastermind." After saying that, Ji Tianxing took a deep look at Yuancheng before turning around and leaving. Yuancheng's heart was shaken by the deep look in his eyes. Fear rose from the bottom of his heart. However, he quickly suppressed the distracting thoughts in his mind. He quickly carried Marshal Saint Chenyue and returned to the white light disc at lightning speed. "Quick! Come and help save Chenyue." He flew back to the crowd and placed Marshal Saint Chenyue on the ground. He then hurriedly performed his art to treat her. Marshal Saint Qingshan and the other young Marshal Saints quickly gathered around and looked at Marshal Saint Chenyue anxiously. After a short while, the crowd checked Marshal Saint Chenyue's injuries clearly. They frowned fiercely and revealed worried expressions. "Your Highness, Ji Tianxing's black needle is extremely poisonous. We must remove the black needle and remove the poison from her divine soul. Marshal Saint Chenyue's divine soul has been corroded to such an extent. Even if we can save her, her cultivation will fall greatly and her consciousness will be damaged. Ji Tianxing, that bastard, is too despicable and vicious." The young Marshal Saints discussed with each other through sound transmission. They were filled with righteous indignation. Yuancheng glanced coldly at the crowd and said with a dark face, "I asked you to help me remove the poisonous black needle, not for you to talk. I know the power of the poisonous black needle better than you." Hearing his words, the Marshal Saints suddenly understood the origin of the poisonous black needles. One of the young Marshal Saints said without hesitation, "Since the poisonous black needle belongs to your Highness, quickly take out the antidote and save Marshal Saint Chenyue." Yuancheng was immediately furious. He raised his hand and slapped the young martial saint's face. He scolded angrily, "Idiot! The poisonous black needle is specially used to deal with Ji Tianxing. Where is the antidote?" The young martial saint was humiliated to the extreme after being slapped in front of everyone. However, he did not dare to resist, nor did he dare to get angry at Yuan Chong. He could only cover his face and leave submissively. In the end, Martial Saint Qing Shan and Yuan Chong worked together to remove the poisonous needle from Chen Yu's body. Yuan Chong kept the poisonous needle. Everyone worked together to cast a spell to remove the poison from Chen Yu's divine soul. Unfortunately, Chen Yu was poisoned too deeply. Even if the martial saints worked together, they could not completely remove it. Moreover, the martial arts competition had to continue. Martial Saint Qing Shan and Yuan Chong had to fight on the stage. Naturally, the treatment would be delayed. By the time the martial saints had finished their battles, more than an hour had passed. At this time, Martial Saint Chen Yu's injuries finally stabilized. However, she was still unconscious. Her divine soul had been corroded to the point of being full of holes, and was on the verge of collapse. In her dark divine soul, there was still a powerful poison that was deeply rooted. She had to find a place that could detoxify the poison and spend hundreds of years to slowly remove the remaining poison. However, the damage to her divine soul was irreparable. It was basically impossible to recover. Even if the poison in her divine soul was completely removed after 100 years, her strength would not be restored. Simply put, Martial Saint Chen Yu was already crippled. Such an outcome made Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan, and the rest very depressed. At the same time, their hearts were burning with rage. They hated Ji Tianxing to the bone. Not far away, Ji Tianxing, Lu Baishuang and the rest looked at all of this with indifferent expressions. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian did not have a trace of sympathy in their hearts. They only felt pleasure and relief. Humph. Martial Saint Chen Yu's heart is vicious. She actually wanted to use the poisonous needle to kill young Master Ji. Now that she has ended up like this, she only has herself to blame. Serves her right. Fortunately, young Master Ji is strong and has taken precautions. Otherwise, the one who is seriously injured and unconscious would be him. We did not guess wrongly. Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan, and the rest will definitely think of a way to deal with young Master Ji. Bai Long circled around Ji Tianxing's shoulder. His eyes were filled with a cold smile as he said in a mocking tone, "If you don't seek death, you won't die. It's a pity that little girl doesn't understand. This dragon lord has already learned such petty tricks when he was playing with mud in the past." Ji Tianxing patted Bai Long's head, indicating for him to speak less. Not long after, the second round of the competition ended. The 14 martial sacred realm experts finally came to an end after an intense battle. 7 martial saints including Mu Changtian, Jiu Jiu and Martial Saint Chen Yu had been defeated and eliminated. The 7 people who had successfully advanced to the third round of the competition were Ji Tianxing, Taihao Yunqi, Martial Saint Qing Shan, Martial Saint Tian Xian, Chaoying, Yuan Chong and a tall martial saint. A tall martial saint was of a foreign race. He wore a fiery red robe and a dark gold crown on his head. He had a head full of fiery red hair, and a pair of golden eyes. He had a fluffy beard on his lower jaw and looked somewhat exotic. He was the current king of the Flame Spirit tribe, and was also a rank 7 martial saint. Chapter 2189. However, the atmosphere on the white disk was getting more and more tense. Most of the 20 young martial saints were heavily injured. Their auras were weak, and their expressions and eyes were dim. However, the most miserable one was Martial Saint Chen Yu. Yuan Chong wanted to send her away from the void platform and return to Sky Gazing City to heal. However, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly was not over yet, and no one could leave. No matter how arrogant he was, he did not dare to go against the rules to avoid embarrassing his big brother Yuan Zhen. Soon, the third round of the competition began. Yuan Zhen announced expressionlessly, "In the third round of the competition, Yuan Chong, who is ranked first, does not need to draw lots. He will advance to the next round. As for the other 6 martial saints, they will draw lots to decide their opponents. After that, He threw the 6 jade slips into the air and messed up the order. Wenren Jiuxing, who was always quiet, stood up. For this round of drawing lots, I'll be the one to do it. He waved his hand and shot out 3 green lights. The 6 jade slips were divided into 3 and brought back to him. Then he read out the results with a solemn expression. The results are as follows. A tall martial saint against Chaoying, Taihao Yunqi against Qingshan martial saint. Tianqing against Tianqin martial saint. As he finished, Atal and Chaoying looked at each other and stepped into the light door calmly. Ji Tianqing looked calm. Tianqin martial saint looked at him with a dark gaze. No one knew what he was thinking. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were excited. They transmitted their voices to Ji Tianqing. Young Master Ji, the chance for revenge is finally here. Ha ha ha, Tianqin martial saint, that bastard, he finally met you. He is unlucky this time. Even Lu Baishuang gave up her modesty and looked at Ji Tianqing with a gentle gaze, a hint of hope in her eyes. Although she did not say it out loud. However, Ji Tianqing could understand what she meant just by looking at her eyes. Obviously, she wanted Ji Tianqing to avenge her. As for Martial Saint Qingshan, his expression was rather gloomy. He secretly glanced at Taihao Yunqi and couldn't help but mutter. Damn it, I actually met him. I'm afraid I won't even be able to secure 4th place this time. Even if he can defeat the other 2, he can only rank 5th at most. Soon, the battle between Atal and Chaoying began. The 2 of them gave it their all and executed all kinds of secret techniques. They fought in the void, causing the sky to be filled with light and shadows. Atal was the king of the Flame Spirit clan, and was naturally adept at controlling fire. Although he was only a martial sage, he was able to control the heavenly flames. Every move he made caused a sea of fire to fill the sky and fill up the empty space. His attacks were incomparably ferocious and overbearing. His mana was dense and long, as if it was inexhaustible. On the other hand, Chaoying was a descendant of the orthodox lineage. Her martial arts foundation was solid, and her mana surged like a river. Moreover, the sword techniques and ultimate techniques that she executed were orthodox techniques of the 5 elements. Every single move was filled with a vast and mighty aura. However, she was too young after all, and her strength was 2 levels lower than Atal's. The 2 of them had only exchanged a few hundred moves, and she was already showing signs of defeat. She was obviously at a disadvantage and was in a very passive position. Many martial sages on the White Light Disk were watching the battle between the 2 of them attentively. Sea Island Master, Cloud Sky Palace Master, Granny Yulong, and the others commented from time to time. They were all worried for Chaoying. Lady Chaoying is so young, but she already has such a high cultivation level and attainments in the sword principle. She is really commendable. Every move she makes has the demeanor of a prestigious lineage. It is really admirable. It can be seen that the Exploration Mountain Martial Sage has put in a lot of effort. It is a pity that her strength is not as high as Atal's. After all, she has less than 300 years of cultivation. As the people discussed, they looked regretful and comforted the Exploration Mountain Martial Sage. However, the Exploration Mountain Martial Sage shook his head and said with a smile, "You don't have to comfort me. Chaoying will definitely lose this battle. She is no match for Atal. Actually, with Chaoying's age and strength, I am already very happy that she is able to enter this round of battle. Of course, this is the result of drawing lots. Of course, there is a bit of luck involved." Seeing the Exploration Mountain Martial Sage being so wise and open-minded, the people did not say anything more. They all started to compliment him. After 15 minutes, the battle between Atal and Chaoying ended. The result was without suspense. Atal was naturally the winner. Although Chaoying lost, it was still a glorious defeat. Chaoying admitted defeat and left the arena while panting. Atal cupped his hands and bowed to her before leaving as well. The first battle ended. Immediately after, the second battle began. The Green Mountain Martial Sage and Taihao Yunqi entered the arena one after another. After standing still in the void, they cupped their hands and bowed to each other. "Seventh God's child, I didn't expect to meet you. I am really unlucky." The Green Mountain Martial Sage revealed a bitter smile and said to Taihao Yunqi. Taihao Yunqi smiled and nodded. He comforted him. "There is no choice. This result was drawn by drawing lots. It is not something you and I can control. The Green Mountain martial sage nodded slightly. He turned his head and glanced at Ji Tianxing on the white light disc. He said in a deep voice, "Actually, I want to fight with that kid the most. I hope he will lose to the Heavenly Heart martial sage. This way, I will have a chance to fight with him for the 5th place." Taihao Yunqi raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "This idea of yours is destined to fail. It is better to give up on it." What do you mean?" The Green Mountain martial sage frowned and looked at him with displeasure. Taihao Yunqi smiled and said, "No need to ask. You will know later." Then the two did not waste any more words. They both took out their magic treasures and weapons and started to fight. The two were the best among the young martial sages. One was ranked 2nd, and the other was ranked 4th. Not only were their cultivation realm high, but their cultivation was also very profound. The secret techniques they had mastered were also strange and unpredictable. In the process of fighting, all kinds of lost and rare secret techniques emerged one after another. It was dazzling. Without a doubt, the battle between Taihao Yunqi and the Green Mountain martial sage was the most entertaining battle in this sacred assembly. The two were locked in a fierce battle. Strange techniques were used, causing the void within 500 miles to turn into a 7-colored ocean, creating all kinds of scenes. Not only were the martial sages on the disc entranced, but even the hundreds of thousands of martial sages on the Sky City Square were fascinated. They were excited and agitated. This intense battle lasted for a full half an hour before it ended. The Green Mountain martial sage was still slightly inferior. He was severely injured by Taihao Yunqi. His body was covered in blood and his hair was disheveled. However, the Green Mountain martial sage had an ulterior motive. He refused to admit defeat and continued to fight. He did this to help Yuan Chong. He purposely exhausted Taihao Yunqi's magic power and forced him to use several trump cards. In this way, Yuan Chong watched the battle and understood more about Taihao Yunqi. That was why he was confident. Chapter 2190. The battle between Taihao Yunqi and the Green Mountain martial saint had ended. Just as the Green Mountain martial saint had expected, he had lost to Taihao Yunqi's sword and could not maintain his 4th position. Even if he could defeat the other 3 who had lost, he would at most be ranked 5th. Soon, it was Ji Tianxing and the Heavenly Heart martial saint's turn. Before the two of them had even entered the stage, there was a deep enmity between them. Ji Tianxing glanced at him coldly. He had already made up his mind to not let this hypocritical and despicable guy off. The Heavenly Heart martial saint naturally thought of this and guessed that Ji Tianxing would take revenge for Lu Baishuang. However, he was proud and did not think that he would definitely lose to Ji Tianxing. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a sharp gaze, and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then he stepped into the golden light door and entered the void platform. Ji Tianxing followed closely behind. They stood still in the void, facing each other with a distance of 10 miles between them. The two of them stared at each other, their eyes filled with coldness. Ji Tianxing did not want to waste his breath and immediately activated his powers. He formed a sword art with both hands and displayed his sword art. Sword Rain. His hands formed a mysterious seal, and his body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky, bursting forth with an incomparably powerful aura. Suddenly, thousands of rays of starlight appeared out of nowhere in the dark and cold void. Every ray of starlight condensed into a starlight sword that was 10 feet long and shot down from the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more than 6,000 starlight sword lights covered the void and locked onto the Heavenly Heart martial saint's spiritual soul aura. As long as he was in the void platform, he would not be able to escape from the sword rain. Before the rain of swords fell, the void within a radius of several hundred miles was illuminated in a dazzling silver light. The terrifying power suppressed the Heavenly Heart martial saint, causing his body to bend and his face to turn pale. In the depths of his spiritual soul, a cold aura of death appeared. He could clearly feel the aura of death. This is impossible. I have already reached the 7th level martial saint realm, and he has just broken through to the martial saint realm. How can he have such terrifying power? At this moment, This was the only thought in the heavenly heart martial saint's mind. 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper. At the critical moment, he shouted with a solemn expression and summoned a powerful defensive magic treasure. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, a huge golden dipper the size of a house appeared above the heavenly heart martial saint's head. The dipper's dipper looked like an ordinary person's dipper. The dipper's dipper had a large opening at the top while its bottom was smaller. The material of the golden dipper was very special. Its surface was engraved with mysterious runes, and it flickered with a dark golden light. Golden Dipper Saint Realm spent 80 years of his blood alchemy soul dipper. Not only did it consume 36 types of ores and adamantium, it had also been tempered 1,000,000 times in the geocentric furnace, making its defense extremely powerful. Protect him, protect Mountain Martial Saint Soul Mind, Saint Soul Chi Sword. Bees. Bang 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 bang. The starry sword light fiercely stabbed into the 100 Refinements golden chalice, and actually emitted a series of metallic clanging sounds, crisp and clear. After that, many of the starry sword lights changed their direction, and pierced towards the heavenly heart martial saint. However, they were all blocked by the golden light shield, causing a loud and dull sound. For a full 10 breaths of time, the void was in chaos. Under the dazzling starlight, there was an inconspicuous golden light. Even though Heaven Heart Martial Saint had the protection of the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, he was still like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea, undulating up and down, appearing and disappearing. Thousands of starry giant swords moved according to Ji Tianxing's thoughts. They danced in the void and tried to assassinate the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. The golden light shield could no longer protect him, and was soon shattered by the starry sword. He had no choice but to enter the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice and rely on this high-grade sacred artifact to protect himself. After 10 breaths of time, the thousands of starry swords were shattered by the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, turning into billions of specks of starlight that dissipated in the void. At this moment, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flew out from the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, panting with lingering fear. He looked at the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper carefully, and realized that it was filled with scratches and dents. Even though the Golden Dipper was not broken, and could still be used normally. However, the densely packed scratches and dents showed the terrifying power of the starry sword lights, causing the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart to palpitate and his mouth to dry up. Damn it! He did not even use his sacred artifact, and he can hurt my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper? This is too terrifying. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint's expression became more serious, and a cold light flashed across his eyes. No, I cannot delay time with him. If I continue to be entangled with him, I am afraid my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper will be broken. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint made up his mind, and immediately took out a dark red talisman. Swoosh. When he poured his mana into the talisman immediately burned and turned into a dark red blood light that surged into his body. Instantly, his body expanded violently, and in the blink of an eye, he became a giant that was 1,000 feet tall. This giant's body was dark red, and its 4 limbs and muscles bulged up like rocks. Its face was ferocious and terrifying, and its eyes were dark red like blood. Its body was still burning with dark red flames, and it exuded an extremely violent aura. More importantly, its strength had increased by more than 4 times, and it was comparable to a rank 8 martial sage. Roar. The giant beat its chest and let out a carefree and excited roar. Its eyes were red as it stared at Ji Tianxing. It sneered and punched towards him. Ji Tianxing died. Following its deep roar, it punched out 2 fist shadows that were the size of mountains and smashed towards Ji Tianxing from the sky. Ji Tianxing raised his head and glanced at it. He was expressionless as he shouted, "Heavenly Dragon Overlord Body!" Instantly, his body shone with bright golden light, and his body expanded abruptly, turning into a golden giant that was 1,000 feet tall. The giant that the Heaven Heart Martial Saint had transformed into had a violent and terrifying aura. Ji Tianxing had turned into a golden giant, and his aura was sacred and majestic. Star-shattering fist. He was not to be outdone. He raised his fists and punched out 2 starry fist radiances to fight against the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Bang bang. The starry fist radiances and the dark red fist shadows collided violently. Instantly, there were two deafening explosions. The four fist shadows collapsed at the same time and exploded into light fragments that covered the sky and scattered in the void. However, Ji Tianqing's strength was stronger, and he actually sent the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flying backwards. He rolled and smashed into the void 100 miles away. Without waiting for the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint to land, he took the opportunity to use an ultimate technique. Heavenly Dragon Proud Slash. He clasped his palms together and activated 100% of his strength as he slashed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Chapter 2191. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint had just dissipated the impact and stopped in midair. Before he could regulate his breathing and suppress his internal injuries and surging dermic powers, his surroundings were illuminated by a dazzling golden light. He looked up subconsciously and saw a huge golden dragon shadow, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Within the golden dragon shadow, there was a huge golden sword that was 1,000 feet long. Its sword intent was extremely sharp. Oh no! The Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's expression changed drastically. A tinge of fear flashed across his eyes. At the critical moment, he controlled the 100 alchemy golden chalice to block above his head. Clang! Almost at the same time, the huge sword slashed onto the 100 alchemy golden chalice and exploded with an earth-shattering sound. At that moment, the huge golden sword exploded into millions of golden fragments. The 100 alchemy golden chalice also had a 3-foot-long dent on it. It tumbled and flew into the distant void. Ji Tianqing's sword was too powerful. It actually sent the 100 alchemy golden chalice flying. It was completely out of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's control. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was instantly shocked. He subconsciously teleported 50 miles away from Ji Tianqing. Even though he had already expected Ji Tianqing's attack to not stop, and wanted to take the opportunity to defeat him, his reaction was fast enough. In the blink of an eye, he had teleported dozens of miles away. However, he still underestimated Ji Tianqing's strength and methods. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing followed him like a shadow and mysteriously appeared behind him. Before he could turn around, Ji Tianqing slapped out a huge golden palm and hit him fiercely. That huge palm was also surrounded by a golden dragon shadow. Its power was unparalleled. Bang! With a deafening explosion, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was hit by the huge palm. He flew out with blood spurting out of his 7 orifices. This time, he did not have the protection of the 100 alchemy golden chalice. Even if he was wearing a saint's soft armor, it was difficult to block the terrifying power of the heavenly dragon palm. His back caved in. Dozens of ribs and bones in his chest were all shattered by the terrifying power. Even his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were shattered and displaced. He drew an arc in the void and fell 50 miles away. As soon as he stood up, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The dark red blood was obviously mixed with pieces of internal organs. The heart-wrenching pain caused the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's face to turn pale. He furrowed his brows tightly and cold sweat broke out all over his body. Due to his heavy injuries, his strength was greatly weakened, and he only had about 60% of his original strength left. However, he still gritted his teeth and refused to admit defeat. He made up his mind that even if he lost, he could not let Ji Tianqing win too easily. At the very least, he had to exhaust Ji Tianqing's mana, so that Ji Tianqing would not be able to go all out in the next round. Shocking Sword Codex. Enduring his injuries, he formed a hand seal with both hands and used his trump card. Suddenly, flames surged out of his body and condensed into thousands of flaming swords that pierced towards Ji Tianqing. A look of disdain flashed across Ji Tianqing's eyes. He shouted, "Showing off in front of an expert. Let me show you a real sword art." As he spoke, he formed a hand seal and used his ultimate sword art. Sect Returning Swords. He shouted coldly and formed a mysterious hand seal, releasing a mysterious and invisible power. Instantly, over 100 starry giant swords appeared out of thin air within a radius of several hundred miles. Kill. Hundreds of swords fell like meteors and pointed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. At this moment, the void was completely filled with violent sword chi. 60% of the area was illuminated by the cold starlight. Under the huge swords was the Heaven Heart Martial Saint, whose face was covered with blood. 40% of the area was illuminated by the dazzling flames. Under the thousands of flaming swords was Ji Tianxing, who was unscathed. His expression was cold and indifferent. Such a stark contrast made the 30 or so martial sages who were watching the battle secretly break out in cold sweat. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square all had their hearts in their mouths. All of them held their breaths and stared at the light screen without blinking. Everyone knew that this was the trump card battle between Ji Tianxing and the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. After this battle, the victor would be revealed. Bang bang bang. Thousands of flaming swords hit Ji Tianxing one after another, creating a series of loud noises. However, he maintained the heavenly dragon overlord body form, and his whole body shone with golden light. The flaming swords that were as dense as raindrops were all shattered after hitting him. His body only trembled a few times, and he was pushed back a few steps by the power of the swords. He did not have any obvious injuries. On the other hand, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was in a miserable state. Even though he was in his transformed state, he was 1,000 feet tall and his whole body was dark red like fire, filled with a violent aura. However, after the hundreds of swords hit him one after another, his flesh and blood flew everywhere as he screamed in pain. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was pushed back 10 miles by the swords. His left arm was crushed by the sword radiance, and his right wrist was cut off by the swords. Even his chest and back were covered with holes and wounds, and dark red blood was spurting out of them. His whole body was covered with blood, and he was in a miserable state. He did not look like a human anymore. He looked like a piece of minced meat that had been slaughtered. Seeing this scene, the many martial sages on the round plate sighed silently in their hearts. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square finally let out a relieved expression. They cheered and discussed loudly. Everyone knew that the victor had been decided. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was injured to this extent. He had already lost. However, before he admitted defeat, the battle was not over. More than half of the hundreds of starry swords were shattered. The remaining swords immediately gathered together under the control of Ji Tianxing, and condensed into a huge sword that was 1,000 feet long. Slash! He shouted with a cold expression and pointed his right hand at the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. That terrifyingly huge sword descended from the sky and slashed towards the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint. With the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's condition, he could not dodge it. Once he was hit by the huge sword, his body would be destroyed. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. At this moment of life and death, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart was filled with despair and shock. He did not dare to force himself and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! I admit defeat." This hoarse shout was filled with an incomparably anxious tone. It was as deafening as rolling thunder. The many martial sages on the white light disk all heard it clearly. Immediately, strange expressions appeared on their faces. Similar thoughts appeared in everyone's mind. If you admit defeat, just admit defeat. Why do you shout so loudly? Do you want everyone to hear you? I've never seen anyone admit defeat. How could he have the nerve to shout so loudly and confidently? Ji Tianxing immediately frowned. He waved his right hand and controlled the huge sword to stop. Swoosh! The huge sword stopped in front of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. It was only 3 feet away from his head. The blade of the sword was right in front of his eyes. The cold and sharp sword aura enveloped him, causing him to feel cold all over. His mind was blank. Chapter 2192. The giant star sword had yet to disappear, and was still emitting a terrifying sword chi. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's body froze on the spot, and he did not dare to move. After a long time, when the giant star sword disappeared, he heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He revealed a grateful expression as if he had just survived a disaster. He relaxed and felt that the energy in his body was like flowing water, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. His limbs and bones were in pain, and his mind and consciousness were dizzy. He finally could not hold on any longer, and his body went limp as he lay in the void, panting heavily. Ji Tianxing glanced at him coldly, and turned to leave the void. Heaven's heart martial saint's pathetic state was witnessed by all the martial saints and hundreds of thousands of practitioners. Instantly, the martial saints on the round plate started discussing. Heaven's heart martial saint is a 7th realm martial saint. How could he be so frightened? The duel between the two of them just now was simply exquisite beyond compare. In comparison, Ji Tianqing's sword skills were even more marvelous. Heaven's heart martial saint's sword skills seemed to be imitating him, and it was very clumsy. A few young martial saints discussed secretly, not daring to let the people from Heaven's End God Nation hear them. Yuan Chang's face was as cold as ice as he cursed angrily. Useless trash, how could he be so frightened by Ji Tianqing? He really embarrassed me. In the square of sky-gazing city, the sounds of discussion were like a tsunami, deafening. Oh my God, this is definitely the most exciting duel in this sacred assembly. The sword skills of the two martial saints are simply superb and have reached the peak. Ji Tianqing's sword skills are obviously more profound. He really has the style of Kenshin. There are rumors in the martial world that he is the successor of Kenshin, but no one believed it. Today, after seeing him display his sword skills, I can confirm that he is definitely the successor. Speaking of which, Heaven's Heart martial saint is a great martial saint who has been famous for many years. He is powerful and has a respected status. But he was so scared by Ji Tianqing that he was in such a sorry state. After all, he had walked through the gates of hell, and was almost killed by Ji Tianqing's sword. How could he not be afraid? So even martial saints are afraid of death. I thought that those high and mighty martial sages were like deities. One is the Heavenly Heart martial saint, and the other is the Tianqing martial saint. Their names are somewhat similar, but their strengths are different. It just so happens that the two of them met. It seems to be quite interesting. Many martial artists in the square discussed heatedly for a long time. On the void platform, on the white light disc, Ji Tianqing calmly returned to Lu Baishuang's side and smiled at her. Are you satisfied with this result? Lu Baishuang looked at the Heavenly Heart martial saint in the air. Seeing him in such a sorry state like a dead dog, a look of relief appeared in his eyes. The anger and hatred that had accumulated in his heart finally dissipated. She turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing and smiled warmly like a spring breeze. She nodded heavily. This smile made Ji Tianqing stunned. It also made Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian dumbfounded. The two of them looked at each other and whispered softly, Holy Emperor Baishuang can actually smile. Aren't you talking nonsense? Who doesn't know how to smile? It's just that Holy Emperor Baishuang has always been as cold as ice. No one has ever seen her smile before. That's true. Looks like young Master Ji's charm is great enough to melt the ice mountain. Not long after, the Heavenly Heart martial saint left the void platform in a sorry state. This round of competition had ended. Next, Chaoying, Qingshan martial saint and the Heavenly Heart martial saint had to compete for the 5th place. The Heavenly Heart martial saint was severely injured. His physical body was on the verge of collapse, and his strength was extremely weak. He no longer had the strength to continue fighting. He could only give up and settle for the 7th place. Chao Ying and the Qingshan martial saint went up to the void platform and started a not-so-intense battle. The two of them had a harmonious relationship. One was the Holy Emperor of the Heaven and Divine Nation, and the other was a citizen of the Heaven and Divine Nation. Both of them loved Yuan Zhen. So far, there had been no injuries or deaths in their fight. After exchanging over 100 blows, Chaoying admitted defeat. Thus, Chaoying was ranked 6th and the Qingshan martial saint was ranked 5th. Next, it was the final round of competition. This was the final battle of the martial saint rankings. It would also be the most intense and exciting. No matter if it was the martial saints on the round plate, or the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the sky-gazing city, they were all filled with anticipation. Yuan Zhen held the identity jade slips of Ji Tianqing, Taihao Yunqi, Atal and Yuan Chong, and threw them into the air. Granny Yulong walked out and said with a kind face, although there are only 4 martial saints left in the last round of competition, and drawing lots doesn't mean much, I still have to do it. I'll help the 4 of you draw lots to decide your opponents. After saying that, she waved her hand and shot out 2 rays of golden light, splitting the 4 jade slips into 2 and bringing them in front of her. Then, she read out with a serious expression. The results of the last round of competition are as follows. The first round, Ji Tianqing vs. Atal. The second round, Taihao Yunqi vs. Yuan Chong. The 2 winners will continue to fight for the first and second place. The 2 defeated martial saints will also have to fight for the third and fourth place. As soon as she finished speaking, the red-haired alien King Atal stepped into the void platform first. He stood in the void with a calm expression, holding a dark golden scepter inlaid with gems in his hand. Dark red flames danced in his eyes. Seeing Ji Tianqing enter the void and stand 1,000 feet away from him, he stroked his beard and said, "Martial Saint Tianqing, please draw your sword." Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, "My sword Dao has reached perfection. I don't need a sword." "Oh." Atal raised his eyebrows and said regretfully, "So, you're going to fight me empty-handed? I won't be able to see the divine sword?" Ji Tianqing frowned. "What do you mean?" Atal hammered his chest with his right hand and bowed to him. He explained, "I admired Kenshin very much when I was young. It is this emperor's fortune to be able to meet you. It is this emperor's honor to be able to spar with you. Also, I'm very interested in the legendary divine sword, the Burial of Heaven. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see it. Now that I've heard that the divine sword is in your hands, I wonder if you can show it to me and fulfill one of my wishes?" Ji Tianqing looked at him deeply and said indifferently, "Your expression and tone are very sincere. It doesn't seem like you're lying. I'm willing to believe your intentions. But unfortunately, I can't agree to your request." Atal's face was filled with disappointment. He said regretfully, "What a pity. Since that's the case, I'll go all out and force you to use the divine sword." Chapter 2193. Atal did not waste any more time. He immediately waved his scepter and performed a powerful secret skill, Heavenly Fire Backflow. He formed a seal with his left hand and waved his dark golden scepter with his right. He let out a low roar and released endless red heavenly fire. Boom! The dark red heavenly fire covered the sky and poured down from the void. It was like endless seawater pouring into a whirlpool. It immediately drowned Ji Tianqing's figure. Ji Tianqing was in the middle of the heavenly fire whirlpool, but he was not worried at all. He secretly activated his dermic powers, and his body lit up with a faint golden light. His entire body became real and illusory as he entered a translucent state. The endless red heavenly fire crazily washed over his body. However, he was calm as usual and did not feel any pain. He also did not perform a counterattack. Atal's expression changed when he saw this. He used all his strength to activate the heavenly fire, and formed dozens of fire dragons to attack Ji Tianqing. Bam bam bam. However, Ji Tianqing was still unharmed after being hit by dozens of fire dragons. He waved his hand and shot out dozens of giant golden palms, smashing the fire dragons into pieces. Soon 10 breaths passed. Atal unleashed the power of his secret technique to the limit, but he still could not harm Ji Tianqing in the slightest. He had no choice but to withdraw his secret skill in frustration. After the endless heavenly fire dissipated, he was not in a hurry to attack. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a puzzled expression and asked, "Martial Sage Tianqing, why didn't you counterattack?" Ji Tianqing said calmly, "Not long ago, I mastered a secret skill and wanted to test it on your heavenly fire. The effect is not bad." Atal was shocked and asked in disbelief, "I'm not boasting, but I was born with the ability to control all the flames in the world. After reaching the martial sage realm, I was able to control the most terrifying heavenly fire. Not to mention flesh and blood. I can even use the heavenly fire to melt a sacred weapon into molten iron. Martial Saint Tianqing, what kind of secret technique have you cultivated to be able to disregard this emperor's heavenly flame?" Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said calmly, "It's a special sword body. I can only tell you this much. I can't tell you anything else." Sword body. A strange look flashed across Atal's eyes as he asked with more excitement, "Could it be the great achievement sword body created by Kenshin and passed down to the world? That secret skill was spread from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. and was regarded as a Sword Dao treasure book by millions of Sword Dao martial artists. It is truly an unimaginable Sword Dao absolute art. Ji Tianqing looked at him coldly and said in a deep voice, "You talk too much." Atal's expression froze, and he was a little embarrassed. However, he quickly returned to normal and said with a smile, "Martial Saint Tianqing, why don't we make a deal? As long as you tell me whether or not you are the reincarnation of Kenshin, and let me see the sword of burial of heaven, I will immediately admit defeat. This way you can win without using any power. It will be very beneficial for your upcoming battles." Without a doubt, the deal that Atal proposed was extremely tempting. However, Ji Tianqing did not even consider it and said directly, "No need. If I want to defeat you, it will only take a moment. I won't use much power." Atal frowned and his face darkened. He said angrily, "Martial Saint Tianqing, I am so polite to you, but you are so arrogant. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being rude." Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, "Bring it on." Soul-burning purple flame. Atal shouted angrily and held the dark golden staff tightly with both hands. He released endless dark purple flames towards Ji Tianqing. The dark purple flames that covered the sky condensed into 6 huge purple dragons in the void, and attacked Ji Tianqing from all directions. Atal knew that ordinary earth fire and heaven fire could not do anything to Ji Tianqing. Therefore, he directly used his strongest trump card and released his ultimate skill, soul-burning purple flame. The dark purple flames looked dazzling, but they were extremely cold, and were specially used to suppress the divine soul of a martial saint. Once the divine soul came into contact with the purple flames, it would be burned to ashes. In less serious cases, the divine soul would be injured and their strength would decrease greatly. In more serious cases, the divine soul would be destroyed on the spot and they would die forever. However, Ji Tianqing's expression did not change when he saw the 6 purple fire dragons flying towards him. He raised his left hand and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Stars!" Instantly, hundreds of star flames appeared in the void, turning into silver dragon shadows that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, flying towards the 6 purple fire dragons. Bang! 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 The hundreds of star dragon shadows collided with the 6 purple fire dragons, and a series of muffled sounds rang out. The 2 completely different dragon shadows tangled in the void and consumed each other. Ji Tianqing raised his right hand again, and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Lightning!" Suddenly, a 3,000-meter tall 5-colored divine lightning bolt descended from the void and struck at Atal's head. The 5-colored divine lightning beam contained 5 different types of lightning, and its power was terrifying to the extreme. Atal frowned and blocked his head with the dark golden staff. He sneered, "Haha, it's just lightning. Which martial saint would be afraid of lightning?" It was true that every martial saint had to undergo the baptism and test of the 9 heavenly tribulations. Everyone had been struck by lightning many times. Not only could they resist the power of the lightning, but some martial saints could even absorb and control the lightning. However, when the 5-colored lightning bolt struck Atal, it was too late for him to regret. Boom! Crack! With a deafening boom, the huge pillar of divine lightning drowned Atal's figure. The shield released by the dark golden staff was shattered on the spot. Even the scepter was sent flying and fell into the void. Atal was also burned black and smoking by the 5-colored lightning bolt. He screamed and fell into the void. Just a moment ago, he was wearing a golden robe and a crown. He was holding a luxurious and exquisite staff, and looked like a noble king of a foreign tribe. But now he had turned into charcoal. Black smoke was coming out of his nose and mouth, making him look like a burnt chicken. Cough! Cough! He endured the dizziness and pain. As soon as he got up, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of black blood. He looked down at his chest and arms, and saw that his clothes had been burned to ashes. His skin and flesh were also burned black and dry. Black ashes fell off when he rubbed them. Damn it! He was shocked and angry. He glared at Ji Tianqing coldly. At this moment, Ji Tianqing raised his right hand and pointed his index and middle fingers at him like a sword. Sky-piercing finger. A cold light shot out from the tip of his finger, and disappeared into the void. Atal sensed danger coming. His pupils shrank and he instinctively teleported to dodge. However, he underestimated Ji Tianxing's speed. Boom! In the dull sound, a silver light burst out from his chest and blew up countless black fragments and dust. The black ashes and fragments were his flesh and bones. Chapter 2194. When Atal steadied himself, he found that his chest and abdomen were empty, with only a pitch-black spine connecting them. His skin, flesh, bone marrow, meridians, and organs were all shattered and disappeared. All that was left was a half-black and half-red heart. It was still beating, and dark red blood was constantly flowing out. Atal's eyes widened in fear, looking at Ji Tianxing in shock. Previously, he was struck by the five-colored lightning, and his body was numb. Now that his body was so heavily injured, he couldn't feel any pain. This was too terrifying. At the same time, Ji Tianxing took a step forward and appeared in front of him, staring coldly at him. "You've already lost." Atal was shocked and angry, his body trembled, gritting his teeth as he shouted. "No, this emperor hasn't." Ji Tianxing said indifferently, "If you don't admit defeat, you will die in the next move." Atal's body shook, and he became much more clear-headed, his anger dissipating. He had to admit that Ji Tianxing's words were arrogant and confident, but he was right. He was already so heavily injured, if he continued to resist, he might really lose his life. With Ji Tianxing's strength and methods, he would definitely do what he said. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head with a dejected expression, and said in a hoarse voice, "This emperor admits defeat." It was just 4 words, but it seemed to have used up all his strength. After speaking, he used his magic power to wrap around his broken body, and staggered away from the void. When he returned to the round plate where everyone was gathered, he inadvertently glanced at Yuan Zhen, an apologetic look flashing through his eyes. Yuan Zhen's expression didn't change, as if he didn't notice. But in reality, his fists in his sleeves were clenched, and the veins on the back of his hands were bulging. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, didn't hide as well as he did. His brows furrowed, and a cold light flashed through his eyes. "Damn bastard. We used both soft and hard methods, but he still didn't take the bait, and didn't show any signs. Your Highness, although we released the news, and let everyone know that Ji Tianxing is Qinshin's reincarnation. However, when everyone heard this news, they were all skeptical. We still can't find any conclusive evidence to prove Ji Tianxing's identity." Yuan Zhen transmitted his voice with an indifferent tone. "We acted too hastily and made it too obvious. Ji Tianxing sensed our hostility, so he was very cautious and vigilant. It's normal that he didn't reveal any flaws." Qin Zheng was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully, "Then what should we do? Could it be that we can't do anything to him, and allow him to take first place in the sacred assembly?" How is that possible?" Yuan Zhen sneered and said in a cold voice, "Since Ji Tianxing has already seen through our intentions, we'll make sure he doesn't return." "I must obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven." Qin Zheng hesitated for a moment before asking solemnly, "Your Highness, are we really going to use that plan?" Right now, the Void platform was in full view of everyone. He's a popular figure in the Luoshui Divine Nation. If something happens to him here, we won't be able to escape. "If I'm not worried, what are you worried about?" Yuan Zhen turned his head and glanced at him and sneered. "As long as we can obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven and obtain the mystery of Father's Ascension, everything will be worth it. Moreover, Ji Tianxing's accident is an accident. What does it have to do with us? For the past 300 years, the Void platform has been unstable and accidents happen frequently. This is something everyone knows." Yuan Zhen did not continue his words. As for the plan, he had already discussed it with Qin Zheng, and both of them were well aware of it. Soon, the second round of the competition began. Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong entered the Void platform one after another and started a fierce battle. Both of them had special identities. One was the 7th godson of the vast divine nation, while the other was the 4th godson of the heaven and divine nation. Moreover, both of them had reached the rank 7 martial sage realm, and had mastered powerful secret skills. Naturally, this battle was incomparably exciting. The sky was filled with spiritual light, and it lit up the void for hundreds of miles, forming a dazzling scene. Various secret skills and martial skills were displayed by the two of them, and it was a feast for the eyes of the spectators. Not only were the hundreds of thousands of martial artists captivated by the battle, even the many martial sages on the round plate were excited, and their eyes were dazzled. This exciting and intense battle lasted for a full hour. In the end, Taihao Yunqi was defeated by Yuan Chong by a single move. This result was not out of everyone's expectations. After Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong left the void, Yuan Zhen announced loudly, "For this round of battle, Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong have won. Next, Taihao Yunqi and Atal will fight for the third and fourth place. As for the first and second place, it will be decided by the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong." As Yuan Zhen's voice fell, Taihao Yunqi stepped into the light door and entered the dark void. Although he had used up a lot of his spiritual powers in the battle with Yuan Chong, he was also seriously injured. However, he refused to give up and insisted on entering the arena. Atal's injuries were even more serious, and his strength was reduced by 40 to 50%. He was in a terrible state. Originally, he was still hesitating whether he should enter the arena to fight. Seeing Taihao Yunqi enter the arena with injuries, he could not just admit defeat. He could only enter the void. The battle between the two of them was not too intense. After all, both of them had suffered heavy injuries. After exchanging more than 1,000 moves, Atal was sent flying by Taihao Yunqi, and his injuries were even more serious. Atal thought about it for a while and admitted defeat. As a result, Taihao Yunqi became the third place of the Sacred Assembly. The fourth place was naturally Atal. 3 of the top 5 places of the Sacred Assembly had been decided. Only the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong would be settled. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the white light round plate became heavy. More than 30 martial sages' gazes were focused on the two of them. In the square of Wuxia City, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were also staring at the screen, looking forward to the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong. Everyone knew that this would be the last battle of this sacred assembly, and it would definitely be the most exciting battle. Everyone had doubts in their hearts. Would Yuan Chong be better and continue to be in the first place? Or would the shining new star, Ji Tianqing, replace Yuan Chong? Under everyone's gaze, Yuan Chong was the first to enter the void. He stood in the void with his arms crossed in front of his chest, revealing a confident expression and exuding an invisible majesty. Ji Tianqing entered the void with a calm expression and stood 10 miles in front of Yuan Chong. Before he spoke, Yuan Chong sneered and said, "Ji Tianqing, all of us have underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be able to win all the way until now, and even have the chance to fight with me. However, meeting this seat, your luck ends here." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said in a calm tone, "Unfortunately, it's your misfortune to have met me." Chapter 2195. Ji Tianqing's expression and tone were very calm. He was neither bluffing nor shouting. It was as if he was stating a fact. Because of this, Yuan Chong frowned and his face was as cold as ice. Since the beginning of the sacred assembly, Ji Tianqing's performance had made him feel deeply afraid and threatened. He had purposely said those words just now to bluff and boost his confidence. However, Ji Tianqing was still as arrogant as ever, which made him furious. He didn't want to waste any more time. With a clang, he pulled out his sword and shouted coldly, "Ji Tianqing, cut the crap. I'd like to see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance." Ji Tianqing naturally didn't bother to argue with him. He didn't use the Burial of Heaven sword either. He made a sword sign with his right hand and pointed to the void. "Sword, come." Following his cold shout, a cold silver light immediately lit up in the void above his head. Swoosh! 1,000-meter-long starry sword, carrying a mountain-sized white tiger phantom, descended from the sky and slashed down. Roar! The white tiger phantom was quite lifelike, exuding a murderous aura that could destroy everything. Yuan Chong was enveloped by the cold and sharp sword intent. He felt a stabbing pain all over his body, as if his skin and flesh were about to burst open. He clenched his teeth and held the sword with a gloomy face. He used all his strength to counterattack. Scattered Stars chess piece. With a cold shout, he waved his sword and slashed out hundreds of silver sword lights. They intertwined into a big net in the void and formed a mysterious sword array. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than 600 silver sword lights, like dazzling starlight, were arranged in a special way and flew back and forth as fast as lightning. Yuan Cheng was in the middle of the sword array. He could attack or retreat. Kaboom! In the next moment, the White Tiger sacred sword fell from the sky and slammed into the Scattered Stars chess piece sword array. There was a thunderous sound. Suddenly, the silver starlight bloomed, and the silver light fragments covered the sky. A silver shockwave spread out like a wave and spread in all directions. The White Tiger Phantom and the giant sword were both destroyed and quickly dissipated. The scattered sword formation was also shattered, and Yuan Cheng was forced to retreat over 10 miles. Fortunately, the sword formation blocked most of the White Tiger sacred sword's power. Moreover, he had a high-grade saint artifact to protect him. That was why he had managed to escape unscathed. After the shock wave swept out, Yuan Cheng's figure appeared. He held the sword in his hand and stood in the void, panting heavily. His eyes were like knives as he stared at Ji Tianxing. His eyes were filled with fear. The strongest defense is actually offense. As this thought flashed through his mind, he decided not to passively defend anymore. Instead, he decided to go all out and take the initiative to attack. Solitary Star Fiendish Moon. Yuan Cheng's voice was as loud as a large bell. Dazzling starlight burst from his body as he gripped the sword with both of his hands and fiercely hacked out a 3,000 meters long beam of light. The light blade was like a crescent moon cutting through the void, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill as it slashed down towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's expression did not change as he calmly said, "A firefly dares to compete with the bright moon?" Yuan Cheng was only a martial sage, but he was able to absorb and use the power of the stars. That was unbelievable. That was why he had been able to suppress Tai Hao Yunqi, Atal, and the rest and had been ranked first in the sacred assembly. However, the star martial skill that he had cultivated was created by martial god Tianju, and he had personally taught it to him. To Ji Tianxing, the star martial skill that martial god Tianju had created was too crude. Vermilion Bird Sacred Sword. He stared coldly at Yuan Cheng as he raised his right hand and pointed at the void. Suddenly, the void lit up with dazzling sparks, forming a 3,000 meters long giant sword. The giant vermilion bird phantom slashed down viciously. The power of the stars was also divided into yin and yang. The sun star and the ordinary stars belonged to yin while the power of the sun star belonged to yang. Ji Tianxing's vermilion bird sacred sword was formed by the sun true fire, and its power was extraordinary. Kaboom! In the next instant, the vermilion bird sacred sword and the white moon light blade collided, and a loud explosion shook the void. In that instant, the white moon light blade shattered. The vermilion bird phantom and the giant flaming sword also collapsed. Billions of crimson and silver-white fragments of light burst forth in the void, like the most brilliant fireworks, causing people to gasp in amazement. The 30-odd martial sages on the round plate were all dazzled by this scene. Their faces were filled with astonishment. Even the powerful veteran martial sages were full of admiration as they whispered in each other's ears. It is indeed a battle between the strong. It is so exciting. With Ji Tianxing and Yuan Cheng's strength, they have both mastered the power of the stars. It is unbelievable. The power of the stars is more powerful than the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It is also more difficult to refine and absorb. There is a risk of being burned to death. I wonder how they have mastered it. The two of them seem to be evenly matched. It is hard to tell who will win. Although I think highly of the fourth prince from the current situation, it seems that Ji Tianxing has the upper hand. Don't forget that Yuan Cheng has used a sacred artifact. It can be said that he has gone all out. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, didn't even use a single saint artifact. Just as the crowd was discussing, the starlight in the void dissipated. They saw Ji Tianxing standing in the same place, unharmed. Yuan Cheng's hair was disheveled as he stood in the void 80 miles away. Blood was still dripping from the corner of his mouth. Although he didn't look injured on the surface, in reality, he had already suffered internal injuries from the shock. Before he could make another move, Ji Tianqing used a secret technique and attacked him. Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword. Ji Tianqing raised his finger again, and a giant sword that was 1,000 feet long descended from the sky. It carried the shadow of a green dragon and slammed down. The Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword's aura was full of divine majesty and had the power to suppress everything. Yuan Chang's expression was solemn. He had no choice but to take out a silver cauldron to block the sacred sword's attack. Boom! The sword light exploded and the Azure Dragon Phantom dissipated. The silver cauldron was also sent flying. Yuan Chang's body shook again, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ji Tianqing did not give him any time to suppress his injuries. He raised his hands again and used a mysterious technique. Sword Rain! As he shouted, tens of thousands of starlight sword lights appeared in the void and poured down like a storm, drowning Yuan Chang's figure. Bang! 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 A series of muffled booms rang out incessantly, causing ripples to appear in the void. Yuan Chang tried his best to block with all his means and Dharma treasures. However, the starlight sword lights formed a sword formation under Ji Tianqing's control and continued to stab him, making it impossible for him to defend. In just 20 breaths of time, Yuan Chang was stabbed hundreds of times by the sword lights. His golden robe had long been torn, and his protective soft armor was also broken. There were wounds on his chest, back, and limbs, and blood kept spurting out. Seeing this scene, many martial sages sighed silently. Everyone knew that Yuan Chang was about to lose. In terms of strength and attainments in Sword Dao, he was far inferior to Ji Tianqing. Yuan Zhen frowned and stared coldly at the void, paying attention to the situation of the battle. At this moment, seeing that Yuan Chang was in a difficult situation and his injuries were worsening, he finally made up his mind. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He ordered Qin Zheng behind him in a cold and indifferent tone. Do it! Qin Zheng had been waiting for this moment. When he heard the order, he did not hesitate to withdraw his left hand into his sleeve. He grabbed an exquisite palm-sized jade pendant and crushed it. This jade pendant had a strange structure. It was connected to the void platform's formation and could be used to control the formation. Chapter 2196. Without any warning, the void crack and the hurricane appeared at the same time. Ji Tianqing's figure was immediately swallowed by the hurricane and disappeared into the pitch-black void crack. Swoosh! More than a dozen terrifying void windstorms surged out of the void crack and wreaked havoc on the void platform like tornadoes. Even a martial sage expert could not withstand the power of the void windstorms and was about to be crushed into pieces. Ji Tianqing's starry sword light had already collapsed and dissipated. Yuan Chang, who was covered in blood, was finally out of danger. He rushed out in a sorry state, his hair disheveled and his expression sorrowful and terrified. There was not an inch of his body that was unharmed. However, he did not have time to catch his breath or suppress his injuries. Just as the thought of being relieved of a heavy burden appeared in his heart, it immediately dissipated. He saw with his own eyes that several huge void windstorms were sweeping toward him and were about to swallow his figure. At this moment, his eyes suddenly widened, and a look of realization flashed across his eyes. He subconsciously turned his head and looked at Yuan Zhen, who was on the white light disk. Obviously, he guessed that Ji Tianqing's disappearance and the appearance of the void windstorms were definitely not coincidental. It was his big brother Yuan Zhen who had manipulated them. He was both shocked and angry, and a strange thought flashed across his mind. Damn Yuan Zhen. In order to deal with Ji Tianqing, he is even willing to sacrifice my life? Damn it. He must have calculated that as long as he can kill Ji Tianqing, even if he has to sacrifice me, the Divine Son, Father will not pursue him. In the next moment, a void windstorm thousands of feet high swallowed Yuan Chang's figure. He was seriously injured and had no time to dodge or escape. He was immediately torn into pieces by the void windstorm. Even if he was a martial sage expert and had an extremely strong physical body, in the void windstorm, he was still as fragile as paper. Without the protection of his physical body, his divine soul did not last long before it was swallowed by the void windstorm and completely disappeared. Yuan Chang died. His physical body and divine soul both collapsed and dissipated. More than a dozen void windstorms raged on the void platform for 100 breaths of time, before they gradually subsided. As for the many martial sages on the round plate, they were all dumbfounded by the scene before them. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at the void platform in shock. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. A moment ago, Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong were still fighting fiercely in the sky, using their amazing secret arts. But now Ji Tianqing had been swallowed up by the void crack, vanishing without a trace. Yuan Chong was even killed by the void storm, not even leaving behind a trace of him. The void gradually calmed down and returned to its cold and dark state. However, the shock in the hearts of the many martial sages did not subside for a long time. At the edge of the disk, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Changtian stared at the sky in shock. It's over. Young Master Ji has been swallowed by the void. What's going on? Why is this happening? Mu Changtian and Zhuo Mingqi were filled with grief and indignation as they shouted in confusion. Lu Baishuang pursed her lips tightly, her body trembling, and she could not help but shed 2 lines of tears. Why? Why is this happening? What's going on? Young Master Ji, why is he being swallowed by the void? Her eyes were lifeless as she murmured, her voice low and sorrowful. Seeing Ji Tianqing being swallowed by the void, her mind and strength seemed to have been sucked away. The other martial sages gradually regained their senses as they discussed in shock and confusion. Oh my God! Why would there be a crack in the void? The 4th prince and Ji Tianqing were fighting for first place. Why would they both vanish? It's over. The 4th prince has been killed by the void storm and Ji Tianqing has been swallowed by the void. He will definitely die. Many years ago, I heard that the void platform had been damaged and its power had become unstable. There have been many accidents. I just didn't expect that there would be an accident today. It was not only the martial sages on the disc who were discussing with mixed feelings. Even the hundreds of thousands of martial artists on the Sky City Square gradually recovered from their shock and silence. Everyone exclaimed in shock and helplessness as they whispered to each other. No one could accept this. This sudden calamity actually ruined the most exciting duel, taking away the lives of 2 genius martial sages. At this moment, Yuan Zhen, who was on the white disc, finally recovered from his shock. He stared at the void with bloodshot eyes and roared hysterically. 4th brother. This sincere cry was full of sorrow and regret, causing the hearts of many martial sages to tremble as sorrow welled up in them. Why is this happening? 4th brother, why is the heavens treating you like this? It's all my fault. I didn't supervise you properly and caused you to suffer such a disaster. Yuan Zhen bent over in pain as he roared in tears, as if he was extremely sad about Yuan Chang's death. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, saw Yuan Zhen's sorrowful look and hurriedly comforted him. 1st prince. My condolences. This is an unexpected situation. It's not something you can control. Don't blame yourself. Qin Zheng supported Yuan Zhen and comforted him with a sincere tone. However, Yuan Zhen seemed to be too sad. He cried for a long time and only calmed down when his voice became hoarse. The more than 30 martial sages on the disc all had heavy hearts. Martial Saint Qingshan, Chaoying, and the others all comforted Yuan Zhen. Yuan Zhen gradually woke up. He suppressed the sorrow in his heart and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He walked back to the center of the disc with heavy steps and announced with a solemn expression, "Everyone, this sacred assembly has ended. Unfortunately, there is no 1st or 2nd place in this sacred assembly. As everyone knows, the void stage was damaged hundreds of years ago, and its power is very unstable. Although the craftsmen of our country tried their best to maintain and repair it, it was to no avail. Occasionally, unexpected situations would occur. Unfortunately, an accident happened today and caused the death of Yuan Chong and Ji Tianqing. This, perhaps, is the will of the heavens. The heavens are jealous of the talents." Yuan Zhen was silent for a long time as if he was too sad to speak. Lu Baishuang, who had been in a daze and tears, suddenly rushed out of the crowd and shouted at Yuan Zhen. "No! Ji Tianqing is not dead. He will definitely not die. This is not an accident. This is your conspiracy. You want to kill him. You want to kill him on purpose. As soon as she said this, the martial sages on the disc all quieted down. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Lu Baishuang with a strange expression. Yuan Jun glanced at her and said indifferently, Holy Emperor Baishuang, Ji Tianqing was swallowed by the void storm and will die without a doubt. You have deep feelings for Ji Tianqing. I can understand your feelings. Just like how my fourth brother died in an accident. I am so sad that I wish I were dead. However, I hope you can stay rational and not go crazy. Don't slander me. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.